I'm going to call our first meeting of the Salem Budget Committee and the Salem Urban Renewal Budget Committee to order for Wednesday, April 4th. If the city recorder will call the roll, please.
Mayor Peterson?
Here. Sorry.
Member Bennett?
Here.
Member Tesler? Absent. Member Nanke?
Here.
Member Clausen? Absent. Member Dickey?
Here.
Member Thomas? Absent. Member Clem? Absent. Member Berger?
Here.
Member Kylowite?
Yep.
Member Bailey?
Here.
Member George?
Here.
Member McEvely? Absent. Member Strozit?
Here.
Member Motley?
Present.
Member Williams?
Here.
Member Pruitt?
Here.
Thank you. Will you join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Member Dickey, would you like to make a motion on the minutes for February 21st meeting?
I move we approve the minutes from the February 21st, 2012 meeting.
Second.
Second by Berger. Kylowite. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes from February 21st, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. Well, I want to welcome you to this first budget committee. I want to begin the meeting swearing in our new city councilors. So if the city attorney and Member Blasey will join us, we'll get this underway.
I, Sharon Blazing,
Do solemnly swear or affirm
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution and laws
that I will support the Constitution and laws
of the United States of America and of the state of Oregon,
of the United States of America and the state of Oregon,
and the city charter and ordinances of the city of Salem,
and the city charter and the ordinance of City Salem,
that I will, to the best of my ability,
and that I will, to the best of my ability,
faithfully and lawfully,
perform
the duties of city councilor for Salem
during my continuance therein.
Congratulations.
Yes, we are.
I will alert you all that Member Blasey is an auditor with the Secretary of State's office, so she'll know when we're off the mark, and I hope will help guide us in this. This is going to be an excellent group to take on what I think we're all going to find is a very challenging project, and I think you'll find out just how challenging when the city manager gives you her report to us in the next few minutes. Salem is facing an ongoing, significant fiscal challenge. Some of it's driven by structural deficiencies in the state tax system over which we have no control. What we can control is how we choose to respond in terms of maintaining our history of strong fiscal discipline and commitment to the city's core services. For me, the level of challenge we face is epitomized by the loss of 49.5 employees who've been delivering city services to the residents of Salem, which they have expected and I believe appreciated. But this is only the beginning, and that's why I want to alert you to this. I think it plays an important role during this budget cycle. Over the next couple of years, general fund services will have to eliminate another estimated 70 public service positions and at the same time annually save 3% of that budget. This fact should help inform our discussion of program add-backs or program reductions aimed at using more of our fund balance in the next fiscal year. I want to just remind each of you, the Budget Committee has two overriding responsibilities. We're here to provide a forum for public testimony on the budget, and we're to approve a levy rather, to pay for it. That's our two jobs. In the meantime, we're going to spend the next 4 weeks going through the budget and taking a careful look at the manager's decisions. And in the process, I think we'll have a real interesting time for us and for her. I hope we'll all be on time. We'll be meeting each Wednesday at 6 o'clock sharp, because we're scheduled on CCTV at that time, so we don't want to keep people waiting to start their dinner and watch us. Tells you a lot about my life. We'll also be talking in a while about some other policies and the direction we'll be taking through this. I'll have, from my perspective, I've been doing this for a number of years, some suggestions as we look at the wish list and some other areas we'll go into. So thank you for the chance to just give you my perspective on this, and I hope as any of you have any questions, you'll either raise your hand or you'll come talk to me privately about the way we're conducting the meetings. We have handout material. Ms. Neville?
Good evening, Mr. Chair, Budget Committee members. I am Deborah Neville, the city's budget officer, and this evening the handout material consists of the Budget Committee review calendar that details the 4 meetings we have in April, as well as the funds that we will be covering at each of those meetings. Next week, with our new counselor, we will provide you a updated roster, so if you have any other updates you would like to make to that roster, please let me know. You can either email me or catch me somewhere, and we'll have a refreshed roster. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions on the handouts? All right, we'll turn it over to City Manager Linda Norris to give a presentation of the 2012-2013 budget. You what?
Thank you, Chair Bennett. Could you please add me to the minutes that I have arrived?
As well as.
You noticed that Councilor Tessler had arrived. Thank you. And Clausen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair and Mayor and Budget Committee members. I'm very happy to be at this point, finally, after many months of working on this budget. So on behalf of the managers and department heads and staff in this room, we very much appreciate your attention and your willingness to serve in this important way to our community. I'm going to go over Oregon's budget law just very briefly, and the chair gave you some information about that too. You'll receive the budget message and the budget documents, which are hot off the press. Take public testimony at each of the meetings, approve the ad valorem property tax rate, and then forward a balanced budget to the City Council, who will then have another public hearing, deliberate, and pass a balanced budget. In terms of staff, we have 4 meetings scheduled. The budget message for the city and the Urban Renewal Agency will be tonight. At every meeting, staff will present the fund budgets. I'm actually going to present the general fund budget just in the interest of time, so we don't have so many people coming up to the podium. We will talk to you about the service priority recommendations that we've made in this budget, answer your questions, and if there are any revenue issues, we'll also flag those, so you have that information as we go forward. The city actually has 3 separate governmental agencies. The 2 that we're dealing with tonight and through this project are the City of Salem. We have 21 separate budget funds, as our counselors and long experienced budget committee members know. We are organized into 9 departments, and our total proposed budget in the city is $483 million for 12-13. Then we also have an urban renewal agency, and I serve as the executive director of that. We have 8 urban renewal areas right now, and you'll see as we do that presentation, we'll be closing one, the Pringle Creek URA, this year, and that budget is $45 million. The budget process is always long, but this year it was a little longer. And I just want to tell you a little bit about how we came to these documents that are in front of you. We started last September when I began to anticipate that our revenue was going to be a little less than we had hoped it would be for the current budget year. I asked all the departments who have, and that's all of them now, who have general fund responsibilities, to put together with their management teams a 10% reduction. What would that look like if we had to do a 10% reduction? I knew that was going to be more than we needed to be, but I wanted people to start thinking about what would it be over 2 or 3 years if we had to do that. Then in October, November, we prepared the general fund forecast, and we presented the first year financial report to the budget committee. We realized when we got our property tax levy information from the assessor that it looked at that time that we would have 1.1 million less this year in general fund revenue, and that was not a positive trend going forward. So we pulled back the forecast. We had not presented it yet and did some more work on it to actually scale back our revenue projections over the next 5 years so that we would know that we were going to be predicting more accurately and budgeting more accurately. Then in December, we presented that forecast. We set our internal budget rates, how much we're going to charge for fleet rates, how much we're going to charge for revenue, radio rates, that sort of thing. And departments prepared their initial presentation. One Saturday in January, the City Council took time out to have a work session to talk about mid-year cuts because it was clear at that time in the general fund that we were going to have to make some adjustments now in order to keep from reducing our ending fund balance too much. So we had that meeting and started talking to neighborhood associations and held 4 public forums, as well as talked to some other groups in the community who asked to have more information. Then in January and February, we presented the second quarter financial report and talked to the budget committee members again about the kind of issues that we were facing. Departments finished their budget recommendations to me and reviewing that by the end of February or very first few days in March. And in March, we've been verifying numbers, making sure that things added up, making sure that we had included everything we intended to include in the budget and have printed the documents. And now here we are in April with the budget committee process. So the proposed budget, every year we start a budget with guidelines, and these are the guidelines that we use. The top several are ones that we've used every year. The bottom 2 are different. So this year we looked at this budget preparation. If we have to reduce general fund operating costs over 3 years so that we can reach closer alignment with revenue projections, what recommendations are we going to make? And then we also looked at, because we've been cutting, this is the first of 3 difficult years, but this is actually the 4th year that we've been making some pretty significant reductions. And if we were going to try to maintain as many general fund direct services that we could, we looked at how else could we reallocate discretionary transfers and grants. And you'll see some of those recommendations as we go through this process. It's important to know, and I think people in the community get confused about this sometimes. In the city budget, we have 21 separate funds. In this sheet, I'm not going to go over all of them, but explains what those funds are for. There's also a sheet under your summary area in your budget that talks about this, but money can only be spent for those purposes or legitimate transfers out for services that respond to those funds. So this is a 2-year comparison of the total budget. On your left, you'll see the FY 11-12 adopted budget, which is a total of $461 million. You can see that the beginning fund balance was $134.1. Now this is all funds, and revenues were $327 million, and expenditures were about 89.4% of total resources. Then when you look at the proposed 2012-13 budget, you'll notice that it's increased somewhat But part of that is because we're doing more capital improvement projects with our streets fund in this next year than we did the last year. If you look at revenue, though, you can see it was 327 last year, 327.7 million this year. So a very small increase. Some revenue in some funds went up more than other ones, but revenue is fairly flat citywide. Expenditures are within they're 88.4% of total resources, just 1% more than it was last year. And these numbers include de jure loans to urban renewal areas. That's a loan we make one day and it's repaid the next day. It was $3.6 million in 11-12 and $4.8 million in the proposed budget. So to give you an idea of how this is looking over the 2-year time frame, we start with beginning working capital. It's a little higher this year because we just did another bond sale, and so that money is in the beginning working fund right now for capital improvement projects. Revenue, as you can see, is fairly flat. Expenditures are a little higher in 12-13 than they were last year, again because of capital improvement projects, and we expect to have a little additional unappropriated ending fund balance. I thought it would be interesting to you to see in terms of resources, and that's beginning working capital and the current revenue we expect to receive next year, what funds had the largest increase. And there you see, which will not be a surprise after the last comment, that it's capital improvement projects. It went up 17%. Water and sewer has a 4% increase in revenue. And extra capacity facilities, and those are from SDCs, is a $2.2 million increase, or 10%. The largest decreases in total resources, general fund is down 1%, public works 7%, and building and safety 25%, which is a concern to us, and we'll be talking about that more. As you look at the general fund, it's this is after we've cut $4 million out, and so our current revenue is going up a little bit. In FY 11-12, some money was held back by the county assessor for a Comcast reevaluation of some of their property, and we will receive that next year. But beginning fund balance is down by a little over $3 million. Public works, both current revenue and beginning fund balance are down, and the same for building and safety. So then when we look at expenditures, what's happening, and you'll see that the largest increases, again, capital improvement programs and extra capacity facilities, and then the largest decreases, again, general fund, public works fund, community renewal, which is funded primarily by federal home and CDBG funds, and that funding has been decreasing over time, and then water and sewer expenditures. This shows, it's a different look. If we stacked up what we actually spent in 10 and 11 and look at the very top of that column, you can barely see it there for 10 or 11 contingencies because we didn't have to use much of it. Transfers from one fund to another, so when other funds pay general fund, central services share. Debt service, capital outlay, computers, equipment, that sort of thing. Materials and services and personal services, so all of the labor-related costs. You can see over time what we actually spent in 10 and 11, what was budgeted in 11-12 and proposed in 12-13. Personal services has stayed about the same due to the reductions that we've made this year in some and all funds, but primarily in the general fund. The big increase in materials and services is related to capital improvement projects. Most of that column, about the top third of each column, is CIP. In 10-11, we spent $33 million, budgeted for 11-12, $102.4 million for capital improvement projects. Excuse me, and budgeted $121.2 in 12-13. And they're in the materials and services accounts. And then you can see debt service is increasing. I'll talk a little bit more about what we're doing there. Transfers from other funds back and forth, but primarily from other funds to the general fund, are decreasing because we don't have as many positions going forward. This shows, again, just a different way to look at it, personal services compared to materials and services and capital outlay when you look at all funds together. This is debt service. I want to show that we're paying off our debt. The original amount is the column to your left. The very top, and you can barely see that, is the first two to Willamette Valley Communication Center Fund and the general fund were loans to pay for our new payroll system, the Oracle Time and Labor that you've heard about before, and those will be paid off after this coming year. Then we have community renewal. Well, general fund, excuse me, is next. And then community renewal, the pension, our side account for pension bonds, and GO debt is in the red. That's police and fire bonds at this point, and water and sewer fund. And as you know, we've had large debt, and Peter Fernandez will talk about that more in his presentation for the wastewater treatment plant upgrades that we've made over the last several years. So positions, and the chair talked about we're having to cut 49.6 positions out of this budget. In 11-12, we had almost 1,190 positions. This proposed budget is 1,140.3. And you can see by fund what's changed, and the biggest fund, of course, is in the general fund. And we, for comparisons purposes, we've included parks there. In public works, is 8. 4 of them were recreation staff that for financial purposes were moved into the general fund, but the employees are still there. In the top line, you can see that since 07-08, right before the economic slowdown, from then until now, we've lost 128.75 positions from city staff. And at the same time, our city has grown. In many cases, our service demands have grown. And so we're doing a lot of additional work with many fewer positions. So I'm going to talk, the budget isn't just about cuts though. We have challenges in general fund, but we also have other funds, urban renewal, water and sewer, bond measures, other things that we have a lot of projects going forward with foresight of the city council. And I think the community has a lot to look forward to. So just a few examples related to economic development. We have some airport projects that are budgeted next year at $2 million. Mill Creek Corporate Center, which is an area owned by the state, but the city has an investment in it for some of the infrastructure. We have 2.79 budgeted, and you'll see if you read my full budget message, which I hope you will, that we're doing some water line looping. We'll have Mill Creek Reservoir that will start in the construction phase in next year, some Almsville highway improvements, and Mr. Fernandez will talk about that in more detail. Major projects and infrastructure, these numbers include both extra capacity dollars and capital improvement projects. You can see 121 million next year that'll be going into the infrastructure of this community, which is a wonderful thing. And I can't tell you, and I know Councilor Clem and Councilor Dickey will say the same thing, how happy we're going to be to see these future park site signs come down this year. They've been up there for a long time. And so Eola Ridge Park in West Salem will be under development, and there's money in the budget for that this year, as well as Hoodview Park, which is in Northeast Salem. And then we'll start the master plan planning for the Battle Creek Park that's in South Salem. Also wanted to mention, because it's been long awaited too, the Fairmont Park will be under construction very soon and through the summer. In addition to those projects, we also have some money in the budget for the Minnow Island Bridge and Trail, the design and the permitting processes. And you can see, let me use this cursor, the bridge here, whoops, excuse me. And then the trail across the island. This pond is not there any longer, across the island, and then into our very large Minto Brown Park, which will be a wonderful amenity, and ties West Salem, or excuse me, Wallace Marine Park in West Salem through the Union Railroad Bridge, down through Riverfront Park, and then this connection. And it's many miles of continuous loop trails that are all off-road, and it'll be a great thing for the community. We also are working on some public facilities. This will be the last year that we'll be spending money from the fire bond measure. We built 4 new stations, remodeled the other ones. They're all upfitted for seismic requirements. We've done things to prepare for emergencies, like purchased all generators, emergency generators for the fire stations. So the last work will be done there. In the last year, we've also looked at, and this is just very conceptual right now, as you can see from this drawing, is a potential of a future public safety facility that at this point we're thinking would be located here on this property that we already own. This is the Mirror Pond, and this is the Civic Center. In addition to that, we're exploring what we would have to do to this building to improve it seismically as we go forward. I think everyone in Oregon, after what happened in Japan last year and other things, has become even more concerned than ever about a possible seismic event. And so the City Council is also thinking about that and looking at what else we need to do. We have $109,000 in this current proposed budget for some additional design work for that project. So those are just a few of the projects. There are many, many more, as we'll talk about as we go through this process. But I want to talk a little bit about the challenges we have. And I think sometimes we tend to think that all of our financial challenges are related to the economy. But actually, many of these, we have some structural imbalance with our financing in Oregon, and they would be here anyway. The economy just made them worse. So in some cases, like general fund and the public works fund, there's a structural imbalance. Service demand and most revenue sources are not linked. So how many fire calls we get has nothing to do with how much property tax we have or what our franchise fee payments are. In public works, the transportation revenue is dependent on a lot of things, and that revenue fluctuates with changes in tax rates, what's happening in the economy, whether people decide to drive or not, whether gas prices are going up and down, and then what people do about consumption related to that, and the different vehicle types. So the indicators related to revenue are not tied to what our infrastructure needs are. So the economy isn't all that's at risk there, but it made the problem worse. The next one is we have other funds like building and safety where the revenue is directly tied to the economy, yet we still need a certain level of staffing and we have expenditures. So right now we still have permit activity, but people are doing a lot smaller jobs. So the workload is still there. We still have work for people to do, but we don't have the revenue that's necessary to continue to operate the system. So the economic slowdown is directly related to this problem, and we'll talk more when we present the Building and Safety Fund about our ideas moving forward. Other funds, like water and sewer, have revenue tied to rates. Some have fees or permits, but the revenue isn't sufficient for the future projects and operation needs. We have a lot of aging infrastructure in our center. We've done a lot of work in our system. We've done a lot of work to the wastewater treatment facility, but we're not through there. We have other work we want to do to the water facility, and then all of our pipes. And so we have this very large public-owned utility that provides these very, very essential services with aging infrastructure. Our consumption is decreasing as the economy started to slow down. People are using less water as a way to save money, so we have less revenue. And then the last 2 years, we had very small increases, which we do not believe will be sufficient for our future needs. Then we have some examples of federally funded programs that have declining federal revenue, yet the demand is increasing, and the economy made this worse because we have more people than ever who need these services. The Community Renewal Fund is one example of that. In that fund, we also, the city has money for support to social service needs in the community, which are, very great at this time. And from the general fund in the proposed budget, it's $415,000, and then we have about $270,000 of community development block grant money, federal money, that goes to that need. So those are our challenges as we go forward. And so when we look at that and think about services, what kind of decisions can we make about how we're going to operate our services that are all needed with this uncertain revenue future? And here are some examples of the major points that we've heard from community members over the last 3 years. We want not just public safety, but we want to have a good place to live. We want it to be safe. We want to have parks. We want to have library. We need to live within our means. They want a city, and as we are required to do, to be financially stable. I think there's a strong feeling that we need to set money aside for emergencies. And then just a much smaller circle here. This year, we started hearing we really ought to start looking at exploring other revenue sources. So this is what we're doing about that. We've carefully, over the last several months, examined our service priorities and have put together a budget proposal for you that has service reductions in almost all areas, but it's a proposal that does keep public safety and livability within our community. To live within our means, we're doing things like looking at response times. We will have some increased response times in community enforcement and a little bit in fire and potentially in police. We're looking at what services are going to be available, some things we've recommended cutting. We've looked at hours of operation in other facilities to save money. And then what are our project priorities? There were some projects that we really were hoping to do in this year's budget that we've cut and have not rebudgeted them for next year. Looking to the future and being financially stable, we have maintained adequate beginning working capital funds and reserves in line with City Council financial policies. Every year we look at a 3 to 5 year financial review for all the funds, and we make adjustments as we need. An example of that were the pretty significant mid-year adjustments that we made this year. Every year we present a 5-year forecast to the Budget Committee, and I'm recommending that next year, because these other funds are also struggling, that we do the same for the water and sewer, public works, and building and safety funds, so that you really get a good opportunity to look 5 years ahead and help us make some wise decisions about how we move forward in those areas. And I hope you're up for sitting through that many financial forecasts. So this is our strategy with the general fund and all funds. We want to thoughtfully reduce service levels. All of our management teams, all of the staff in this room, and probably 3 times as many as that, have carefully weighed our service needs and our priorities in the community and council direction and council goals to present this budget to you. We want to operate within our projected revenue on a sustained basis. So we're not just looking 1 year at a time. We're looking out over several years and what's likely to happen so we don't run into a crisis. And then we have to maintain the ability to adjust to emerging issues. We had a good example with the flood in January. We had to respond to that immediately. It's about $9.5 million of expenses. And we had to, just to get the parks in shape for the summer season, take $363,000 out of general fund contingency. And this budget has another $250,000 budgeted for additional park repairs that need to be made, as well as there are some other bridge and infrastructure repairs in part of the budget. So we have to have the ability to do that, to be a city, to make sure that we have enough money to handle those issues when they come up. So we have, as I said, for the general fund at least, we have 3 more years of cuts ahead of us. We can't cut our way out of this problem, though, because some of it has to do with just the financial structure that doesn't work. Revenues capped at a level lower than our growth rates. 12-13 is the first of 3 more years of looking at how we get our costs in line with our revenue projection. And as the chair said, in 13-14 and 14-15, unless we have some major change in revenue, which I don't see any indicator that there will be, those cuts are going to be pretty equal in magnitude than the ones we made this year. So I know every year people want to think about what could we put back, but I would urge you as your city manager that if you want to put something back, that we take something else out so we don't have to lose even more jobs in the next year. So I want to thank you again for taking on this important role and this important work, and for giving us your wisdom and ideas and checking us on the recommendations we've made, because you may want to make different ones. So I appreciate your time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Norris. Are there any questions for the city manager on her budget message? Member Clem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize for being late, but Linda, when will we discuss, I'm looking at B7 in your binder, and I know you don't have it in front of you, but
Member George, could I look at yours?
it actually talks about revenue going up 1.8 million from 11-12 to 12-13. So I'm trying to reconcile that with statements that have been
In the
made
general
that
fund.
in general fund that revenues are going down. I understand the compression and I understand higher costs. I just want to make sure I understand that we characterize what the revenue picture for general fund really is.
For current revenue, we're anticipating a 1.8% increase next year from property tax or from those revenue sources. And then the other thing we'll have next year that we didn't have this year is the money that the county had to hold back for the reassessment of property for Comcast.
Okay.
So that was held back from all cities in the county, and we will receive that next year. So we're anticipating, and I hope we're not being too optimistic, but we're anticipating some increase in revenue, not to the extent we had planned in our forecast, so it's reduced from that, but it is still some increase.
Is that part of that 1.8 million?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
It's already included?
Yes,
You've
it
made
is.
some assumptions about what it will be?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Are there any other questions on the budget message? All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll now move on to review of the Public Works Fund budget. Mr. Fernandez. Do you want to give everyone just a second to find the Public Works Fund budget in here?
Just a second, I think it's right here.
If I may help direct you, for the new people who haven't gone through this before, we have 3 books in our budget binder that we provided to you. Public Works is in Book 2, and you'll see a tab called Public Works, actually, and that will include the Water and Sewer Fund, the Public Works Fund, and the Construction Funds, and that's what Mr. Fernandez will be addressing in his presentation.
Mr. Fernandez.
Thank you. Chair Bennett, Mayor Peterson, councilors, and Budget Committee members, good evening. I am Peter Fernandez, Interim Deputy City Manager. Tonight, it is my pleasure to present to you the proposed Public Works Department budget for fiscal year 2012 and 2013. My presentation will cover all of the department's operations and funds. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge and thank the department's employees for the great work that they do throughout the year. Many of them are here tonight to listen to the presentation, and if the question gets esoteric enough, they're here to help me. So, I'd also like to take a moment and introduce the members of the department's management team. Robert Chandler, Interim Public Works Director, who's been doing a fine job leading the department while I've been on assignment to the City Manager's office. Mark Bechtel, Parks and Transportation Services Manager. Jim Bonnet, who's behind me, the City Engineer. And Francis Kessler, Operations Services Manager, who had been behind me. And where's Francis? He stepped out the door. Perfect time. So, these gentlemen do an excellent job of managing the day-to-day operations of the department. Putting the department's budget together takes a tremendous amount of effort from our supervisors and division managers. Our analyst team pulls it all together and confirms its accuracy. And I want to introduce and thank them for their outstanding effort, and they're all sitting behind me. Tarita Carden from Willow Lake, Jennifer Killer from Parks and Transportation, Rebecca Shaw from Operations, Tammy Stars from Engineering, and Vicki Clark for Administration. They have the big binders with them. Earlier this year, the Budget Committee received presentations detailing the services that each department provides to the community. In summary, Public Works provides 9 key services highlighted here in the following 2 slides. They are the production, storage, and distribution of drinking water, collection, conveyance, and treatment of wastewater, and management of our stormwater system. Collectively, these comprise the city's utility. Public Works Department staff also operates and maintains our extensive streets and park systems and provides a full range of capital project delivery services to the entire city organization. We master plan for all of our utilities, operations, and services and provide administrative support for our day-to-day operations. And our staff helps kids of all ages have fun through our world-class softball complex, our youth recreation programs, And since last fall, Center 50 Plus, we're delighted to have this latest addition to our operational portfolio. The Public Works Department is a large and complex organization. As the largest department in the city, in fiscal year 12-13, our staff will manage 62% of the city's $426 million expenditure budget. The left side of the pie chart highlights the Public Works portion of the overall city budget, and you see it there laid out in our funds that I'll explain here in just a second. Prior to presenting the details of the budget, however, I want to highlight the issue of revenue shortfalls and their impacts to the department and the community. Just buttressing what the city manager has just talked to you about. Over the past 4 years, we have made significant reductions in our operating budgets that have led to curtailing or eliminating some of the services that we provide, cutting 27 full-time positions, limiting utility capital expenditures to what we can afford to do with cash on hand, and seeking ways to make some of our services self-sustaining. The projects supported by general obligation bonds, systems development charges, and urban renewal funds have helped the community address many of its capital needs, but these funds do not, in fact cannot, fund ongoing maintenance and operational requirements, nor do they fund the needed services to the community. My budget presentation shows how we will once again do the best that we can do with what we have. In the coming years, however, we will need to redouble our efforts to identify funding for the community's needs, or we will see continued erosion of our services and infrastructure, particularly in the areas highlighted in this slide. And one area that we don't talk about a lot is the very last item there, the shops complex. Several years ago, we had money funded to build an administration building out at the shops. That was one of the programs that were, one of the projects that was cut as we got into financial difficulties. Building 2, Building 14, the Fleet Building, all those buildings in even a medium-sized earthquake will not be around. We expect that in a fairly substantial snowstorm, we probably couldn't occupy some of those buildings. It is a continuing concern, and we need to identify a way to address that issue, and we always tour that for new counselors. The new counselor will probably want to schedule a tour so she can see how frankly, the majority of our employees operate, and it is not, we do the best that we can do, facilities does the best that it can do in maintaining it, but it is a very, very precarious situation over time. Now the specifics of my budget proposal. The Public Works Department is organized into 4 operating divisions. This chart illustrates which fund houses each division's operating budget. So you'll see there Fund 155, Fund 310, and Fund 101. I'll tell you what those are in a second. The department's 3 operating funds are the Water and Sewer Fund, Fund 310, the Public Works Fund, Fund 155, and a very small portion of the General Fund, Fund 101. The 3 capital construction funds, 255, 260, and 275, are also listed on the slide. This chart shows our beginning working capital in each of these funds. In the Water and Sewer Fund, we anticipate $114 million in resources that includes $72 million in rate revenues. In the Public Works Fund, we anticipate $25 million in resources that includes $9 million in state highway gas taxes and $5 million from the General Fund for parks operations and street maintenance. Public Works Engineering Division staff will manage $115 million in the 3 capital construction funds. These revenues come from a variety of sources that include water sewer rates, general obligation bond proceeds, systems development charges, and grants. And there's sometimes some URA money in there when we're doing projects, and we're managing those for the Urban Renewal Agency. New to the department this year is a consolidation of existing recreation and the Center 50 Plus budgets now housed in the General Fund. And that's an organizational thing, and that's why we show the General Fund. The General Fund provides funds to Fund 155 for parks and for parks operations, for some street maintenance, but there's a little slice of recreation and Center 50 Plus that we've put back in the General Fund, so it's just a little budgetary organizational thing that we've done. This organizational chart provides a complete overview of the department's operating budget and staffing levels. The department totals are listed on the top, and each of the divisions are shown below it. Subheadings in the leftmost two columns include the non-divisional budget and administration. This is where we fund debt service and capital transfers for the Water and Sewer Fund, and the Recreation Services budget that I just spoke about under the Parks and Transportation Division. Our budget proposes 382 full-time equivalent employees. The table shows 2 years of history and our proposed staffing for fiscal 12-13. Not shown in this table is that the department staffing peaked in 2008 at 403 employees. After 2008, we made substantial staff reductions in engineering development services to respond to economic conditions that persist to this day. Last year, we also eliminated an additional 6 positions from the operations division to address declining utility rate revenues. Staff reductions proposed in this year's budget address continuing weakness in the local economy that now affects the city's present and projected revenues. In response to significantly increased workloads, we are proposing adding 2 positions to operations, an engineering technician and a customer service and dispatch supervisor. These positions are funded by utility rate revenues, and I'll mention that the engineering technician is an 11-month seasonal assignment that we are switching to a full-time position, and the customer service and dispatch supervisor is a position that we had actually cut last year, but given the increases in service calls, the massive changes that we're going to be seeing in the utility bill next year, there's a number of changes coming. We anticipate an even bigger increase in workload, and that's why that position is being proposed for refunding and expanding their what their work scope is. The biggest changes to the department staffing are in Parks and Transportation. They include the transfer of the 5.7 employees from Center 50 Plus and a new traffic engineer to support the signal operations program. The traffic engineer position is a grant-funded position. We also propose 5 staff reductions in the Parks and Transportation Division. 4 of the positions are in Parks Operations and are the direct result of the lower revenues expected in the general fund. These include 3 Parks Maintenance Operators and 1 Parks Project Leader. These cuts in staff will reduce the frequency of maintenance at neighborhood parks, cause winter season bathroom closures, and reduce staff availability for weekend volunteer projects. 1 staff reduction in streets maintenance is a Maintenance Operator 1 in the signs and sweeping section. This is the result of lower gas tax revenues and will continue to hamper our ability to keep up with streets maintenance. This slide summarizes the department's budget proposal by fund and budget category. The budget includes over $400,000 in flood recovery projects. In water and sewer, $183,400 is budgeted in the stream cleaning program to inspect and remove debris from all of the city's streams and creeks this summer. And that's actually an increase of $83,000 from last year. In prior years, our interns have done such a good job of cleaning streams that we haven't had to fully fund that program and do every stream. This year, we felt, given the January flood event, that every stream needs to be addressed, and all you need to do is walk out here, and the mayor has to put up with a bunch of rags outside of her window, so we want to make sure to clean those off. So, in the Public Works Fund, we have also included $250,000 in the Parks Operations budget to repair flood damage to pedestrian bridges, creek banks, and other park amenities. And this is in addition, all of this funding is in addition to the bridge repair work that I will touch upon later in my presentation. The budget, unfortunately, also includes a reduction in pavement maintenance activities due to the $500,000 reduction of general fund transfer funding for streets maintenance. What has typically been $1 million was cut in half, just given the general fund issues that we continue to face. As you saw in the previous slide, debt service is a significant expense in the water and sewer fund. In the coming fiscal year's budget, it represents 34% of our projected rate revenue of $72 million. Debt is what financed most of the needed upgrades and expansions to our utility infrastructure over the past 15 years, improvements that serve us well today and will continue to serve us for many years to come. The legal requirements associated with debt, however, is that debt service payments must take precedence over all other budgeted expenses. As such, we have proactively managed our operating and capital improvement expenses accordingly. Debt service payments will be $24 million for the next 2 years, and then begin to decrease in fiscal year 14-15. The decrease in debt service payments will allow us to plan for additional capital investments in the utility starting in those years. We are also analyzing the potential for refinancing our debt. Refinancing may create additional cash flow for the utility, but it must be balanced against possible longer payoff periods. Refinancing debt will also weigh on the requirements of the utility rate proposal that will be before the council in the next year. And very simply, what I mean by that is we may be able to refinance the debt, we may be able to lower our debt service payments, but if it means tacking on more years at the end, it's something that we need to consider versus paying off our debt and being in a much better cash position. So those are the balancers that we'll need to consider and bring before the Water Task Force and Council before we move forward with a refinancing scheme. The proposed construction budget increases by $4 million and moves forward a number of highly anticipated projects in transportation, utilities, and parks. The Streets and Bridges Bond Program is in its peak of activity. To date, $21 million in projects have been completed, and $40 million will be in construction this summer. A few of the key projects being constructed this year include the rail crossing safety projects in support of the Railroad Quiet Zone, the Commercial Street Bridge replacement at Pringle Creek, and the State and Court Pavement Rehabilitation Project downtown. We will also be proposing to use some of the realized bond savings for matching the anticipated federal funding for repair of the flood-damaged bridges in town. A public hearing will be scheduled for later this spring to make this expenditure possible. We have $9 million worth of bridge repairs that we have to do on 7 bridges. We can leverage the federal funding for those emergency repairs with the $1 million. And the only place that we have $1 million is in Streets and Bridges, and we're fortunate to have some savings there, so we can make that recommendation. So the council will be seeing that in the next month or so. The Youngsville Highway Improvement Project will also be constructed this summer. This project is funded by the state of Oregon and supports development of Mill Creek Corporate Center. Also in support of the Mill Creek Corporate Center will be the construction of the Mill Creek Reservoir, which what we formerly called College Reservoir. This 2.2 million gallon water reservoir will provide storage capacity for increased development activity in the South Salem S1 service level. That reservoir will serve more than Mill Creek. That will serve all of the area bounded by Kubler Boulevard, south of Kubler Boulevard, around the I-5 interchange as well. In addition, we will undertake major upgrades to the Boone Road Pump Station. These improvements will increase water capacity in the South Salem S2 service level. In parks, we will design and construct a full improvement of Hoodview Park, formerly known as Cale Road Park, and the pre-development of Viola Ridge Park, and we will start the Battle Creek Park master plan. And for those of you that are observant, you'll see that our utility amount is about $3 less than what the city manager had shown, and that's the city manager included the SDC funds in her total, and I didn't. But there were, there's all kinds of projects in the capital improvement fund. As I conclude my presentation tonight, I want to discuss 5 key budget issues that the department faces. The first, once again, is existing revenues. I want to reiterate that revenues are declining across all of our funds, not just the general fund. In transportation, state gas tax revenues, even with the increased tax rate that was passed by the legislature a few years ago, have not met ODOT's predictions. Combined with the reduced general fund transfers, our ability to properly maintain and operate our street system continues to be hampered. The same can be said for park operations, which relies almost entirely on the general fund. In the long term, we must identify new revenues to address the proper operation and maintenance needs of streets and parks. In the utility, we continue to see declines in water consumption, which translates to reduced revenues. Lower revenues mean tapping our cash reserves to fund operations and reduce capital funding in this coming fiscal year. The rate proposal this fall will speak to both the operating and capital needs of the utility and the rates required to meet the present and future needs of both. New revenues. Beyond utility rates, staff continues to look for other revenues to help address funding shortages. These include working with area industries to accept new waste streams into our treatment plant. These new customers use existing unused capacity at the plant, which is allowing us to realize in the coming year $400,000. and perhaps more in future years as we look for other opportunities. We have also proposed new fees, such as the backflow assembly fee, that we still expect to start in January 2013, to better allocate costs to users. I'm happy to report that in response to the many comments that we received on this new fee, we have worked to improve this service delivery and are actively implementing many of the suggestions that we got from our customers. And I will say it here at the Budget Committee that if we, through the implementation of these suggestions, if we can lower the costs of doing that program, the fee will be lowered as well. So we will have a report in our fee proposal later this year, or maybe even later to the council before we implement, to tell you how we've improved that program and then what the current costs are. Self-sufficiency. Over the past 3 years, we have endeavored to make recreation services as self-sufficient as we can. In the past year, many of the recreation activities have become self-funded. In the proposed budget, the general fund continues to support the Summer in the Parks program, which is one that is specifically geared to families that cannot afford to pay for the service, as opposed to other recreation activities that are fully funded by users. And the general fund will also support movies in the parks. In the coming years, our goal is to continue to look for opportunities to generate more revenues from these activities, as well as from Center 50+ users, to make them completely self-sufficient. This is not a this year goal, this is not a next year goal, but this is something that the 4 staff people that are in that unit have been tasked with, and they are actively looking for ways to make that more self-sufficient and be able to provide those services, maybe even expanded services, fully paid by users. Reduced services. The declines in revenue have caused reductions in services, particularly in parks and transportation. As reported to the City Council in February, our budget proposal does not include funding for aquatics in the coming fiscal year. And as I discussed in my presentation, our budget also reduces funding for maintenance paving of our street system, in this case by 15%. And then finally, continuing capital needs. And I always end I think this is my 4th budget presentation as director, and I always end with continuing capital needs because they are endless. In our over $1 billion enterprise that we have here, capital needs will never end. So let me say that the community has made tremendous investments in our infrastructure, over $300 million over the last 15 years in the utility alone. But much more still needs to be done. Our community requires continued capital investments throughout all of our water, sewer, stormwater, streets, and parks infrastructure. The January flood event showed us that much still needs to be done to address flood control and to repair aging bridges. Many of our water and sewer pipes are beyond their useful life, and our street system still needs many more improvements. Over the next few years, we will present council with proposals to address these needs. This fall, the utility rate proposal will primarily focus on the need for capital investment. And as we wrap up our streets and bridges projects, we will have the opportunity to make additional transportation investments with the anticipated savings that we'll have in that program. As you can see, last slide. As you can see, there are many, many challenges ahead of us in the coming year. Our staff is up to these challenges, and we look forward to working with the council and our citizens to address them. This concludes my presentation this evening. Thank you very much for your attention. We're here to answer your questions.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Fernandez? Member Tessler?
Public testimony first.
Go ahead, Tessler.
Thank you. I was curious on page 19, they show a $259,600 negative balance on salaries and wages. Is that the amount to pay the parks maintenance people that you propose cutting?
Tell me the page again, Counselor, I'm sorry.
19, page underneath the Public Works Fund.
Public Works tab, page 19. Yeah, this reflects, so you're looking at account code 51010, salaries and wages?
Correct.
Yeah, so the reduction of $259,600 from the manager recommended budget to last year is the cuts in personnel.
For parks maintenance.
That would be the 4 parks employees and the 1 streets and sweeping employee. There's 5 employees, or 5 positions that are being reduced.
Okay, so the 259,600 includes all 5 of those employees? Okay, thank you.
Member Clem?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Peter, page 19, same page. 51,230 unemployment. We had 0 budgeted last year. The proposal is to cut 5 positions, but spend 136,000 in unemployment. So I don't expect an answer, right now. But I mean, if it isn't forthcoming now, there are several accounts where we budgeted nothing for last year, and yet we've increased them dramatically this year. So
I think those are, unemployment is one that is it back charged or is it provided to us by? Yeah, so you never know what it's going to be. It's a back charge to the fund.
okay. So what's the risk of budgeting the 136,000 this year over last year? Has there been a major shift in how that program works at the state level?
Yeah, we don't, for unemployment, we just, whatever it ends up being in Fund 155, we just end up using, our beginning working capital. There's always money left over in contingency and money savings that we have in other areas. In 310, we do budget for unemployment.
And,
Okay.
if I may, when we have the self-insurance fund presentation, we can give you more specific
and
information.
I don't mean to hold up the whole process here. I just had one other question on page 33. I actually I'll have a lot more, but I'll do those at the appropriate venue and way. Page 33, we're paying for, or at least we're allocating $50,000 for consultants for community forestry.
Right.
And consultant for watershed planning. So I know there's an importance there, keeping our tree city, but do we really spend that much on year to year? I know we allocate it, but...
No. Some of those monies, for example, the consultant for community forestry is one that we will probably spend this year because we are actively working on that. There's a citizen group that's meeting now, and it's been a council goal to do the the decennial survey of trees and working towards the goal of improving our canopy. So that will probably be spent. Some of the other line items for consultants don't always get spent to their full amount, but issues come up. We had a flood, so we may need to redo, the flood mapping. So we'll need some consulting help, or those are the kinds of things that'll come up, and then we tap.
Is there a real risk by delaying the community forestry strategic planning a year?
Only.
I mean, we can't be everything to everybody here, so.
Only just an ache in the heart of those that want to see more
All right,
trees.
thanks.
Any more questions on Mr. Fernandez's presentation? Yes. Member Blaze.
Thanks, Chair Bennett. Just a quick question. You may not have this answer readily available, but do you have an idea what the average debt service percentage is that's paid?
Well, it's in the water sewer fund, which is where we have our debt service. It represents 34% of our revenues. So we have we expect $72 million in revenue. We have a $24 million debt service. So.
But the percentage?
Oh, what rate we're paying?
Correct.
Do we have
The interest rate.
we have we can give you the sheet. It's very low.
Okay.
It's very low. They're all well under 4%.
Okay.
And we're actually looking now at picking up some in the refinancing. We may be able to pick up debt as low as 2%.
Okay.
We just the debt that we just issued for streets and bridges, the next $25 million bond issue was 2.62 for 15
good.
years.
Okay,
So,
thank you. Good.
Great. If there's no more questions on his presentation, we'll go into discussion after this in the more detailed way we are. I was thinking that we'd just, if you had anything like, could you go back to slide 2 and explain what that slide 2 meant? So I got off the mark here. We'll go to public testimony.
Thank you.
I've heard, Fernandez is always good to interrupt with the public and then bring him back and work with him. Tom Beasley. Do you want to testify? You signed up. You have 3 minutes.
Budget Committee members, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Tom Beasley. I reside in Ward 3. And I believe tonight, for the first time in over a decade, City Manager and Mr. Fernandez have properly summarized the reasons why this city should not tax the revenues of the water sewer fund for use elsewhere in this budget. It is an overarching operation of the city to provide potable water and wastewater disposal. And yet again this year, it will be taxed, their resources will be taxed by $2.4 million for use elsewhere. As stated, their debt services go up from 23 million last year to 24 million this year and next. They do not clear 20 million until fiscal year 16-17. There are 1,529 miles of water sewer pipe underlying this city. Crow-Fi miles between Salem and Des Moines, Iowa, defines the length of stuff laid back to back. Peter is correct. It requires constant repair, maintenance, and expansion. If this budget committee and the city council wants to be responsible, it needs to summon the courage to stop that taxation. It must do so. The only way the water sewer revenue fund can continue is if it has continual rate increases. And that requires only 5 city council members to vote yes. I believe it's time to ask 70,000 registered voters in Salem and West Salem if this is how they want their money spent. And this is the year to do it. It costs nothing to put a ballot measure before the public in November asking for their approval to continue this practice. I assume that there will be a serious discussion about doing this and that you will proceed accordingly.
Any questions for Mr. Beasley? Right, thank you very much. Thomas Smith.
Good evening, Chair Bennett, Mayor Peterson, councilors, and Budget Committee members. My name is Thomas Smith, and I reside in Ward 6. I'm here to speak to the parks budget. While it depresses me so that we have to cut more from this budget, I am happy to see that we are continuing to support our parks. We do the best we can, and there's a group of us out there that want to do more. And we have been. We've been, for I believe it's the last 4 years now, you've had the SPIF grants in the budget. I think I saw them in the budget again for the next year. I hope you keep them there. I know the 2 projects I did using SPIF grants. One I got $15,000 and turned that into over $150,000 project. The other one was a little over $11,000, and I think that project wound up to be over 20. So 2 parks got renovations, and the city only paid, I believe, about $26,000 out of the general fund, and grants and donations from the private sector paid the rest of that. And so it's a great project. A lot of parks are getting a lot of use out of that project. We're bringing in a lot of other money to the city for that project. So I hope that you will continue to keep that in the budget and support the parks. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for the work you do on parks. I watched the work you did on McKay, and it just was exemplary. You really expressed well how the SPIF grants work and the success that folks like you have in leveraging those dollars. So again, thank you very much.
And we have a great park staff they worked really well with us, and these projects are turning out really great.
Any questions for Ms. Smith?
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. Now, we'll go back to a discussion, review, recommendation on the Public Works budget. Okay. Member Nanki.
Yeah, question in regards to debt service on the balance on the bottom of your slide after
Yes.
fiscal year 17-18, it had 116.9 million left.
Right.
Do we intend to keep the payments on par with past payments to where we have 5 years balance left to pay after that, and then dealing with no debt, or carrying
Well,
debt and slowly just decreasing that number?
It continues to
and dragging it
decrease.
out?
We have the, it goes out into the 2020s, so the debt goes out a long time. Do you have the table handy, Vicki?
It's actually on page 225 of your first book.
So, so that's part of the decision that we have to make with the refinancing is, do we push it out further, or do we just, take advantage of the continuing declines? And that's just a discussion that we have to have, and then make a recommendation to the finance committee.
I knew we probably had a plan out there somewhere.
So,
Figure out where it is.
Any further? Member George.
Yeah, I just a point of clarification. I know you mentioned that the tax revenue is down as far as gas tax revenue.
Yeah.
Is that the one account code? Is that the one that's 35310 on page 9? Is that it there?
It is. It's stated. Guys, and what I said, and I appreciate the clarification, Member George. We are receiving more revenue. It is not the amount that ODOT had predicted. So, and that's what. So it's a good clarification. ODOT had predicted. In fact, every month ODOT gives us an annual month-by-month prediction, and we only budget to 95% of that prediction to be careful, and it's even coming in lower than those predictions, and that's kind of a month-to-month thing. So yes, the increased gas tax brought us more money, but as we sort of laid out a plan for all the good paving that we were going to do, we've had to cut back on all of that because there's just it's nowhere near as much as what ODOT had predicted, and that's what the issue is.
I'm helping with that. I'm driving less myself. So. I thought that's probably what it was, because as prices go up, people become more aware of that, and so I figured there was going to be a reduction, even though we got the 6 cents.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Not just that. Electric cars, higher fuel efficiencies, all of those things. There is beginning to be, and ODOT is very concerned about this, there's beginning to be a disassociation between the use of the road and the gas tax. And ODOT is actively, in fact, ODOT's been a leader in looking for the other, a different opportunity, which is some kind of mileage tax or tolling or some kind of combination. There's just a lot of issues related. There's a lot of political issues related to that. So ODOT's actively working on it. But we're going to have to, not just Oregon, every state's going to have to go to that because it's just, as everybody buys their Fisker electric vehicles, there won't be any gas tax.
Member Clem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Peter, 2 or 3 things. Page 8, under Public Works, if you would. 32,621, softball program fees goes from 360,000 to 0. Is there sort of a program shift there in revenue? Where's the softball money? Wallace Marine Park.
Oh, it moved to the general fund. That was one of the changes.
Okay.
That's one of the ones that moved to 101.
Yeah, scared me too.
Yeah. Thank you.
35,310, back to Member George's comment. 2 years ago, we had 7.6 million coming in. Now we've got 8.6.
Right.
Yet the budget characterizes that over 3 years will be down 1.375 million. This adjustment here for this 1 year is still $1 million more than what we've ever received. So it only looks like it's down 156,000, even with people driving less and gas at $4 a gallon. we're still predicting
Right.
almost record levels of gas tax receipts.
From
Is this
from
where
last year.
is this where the 2.2 million comes out every year for landscape maintenance?
It does. That and the street lights come out of that. The street trees come out of that. You can't just look at, gas tax only represents 50%, 60% of 70%. So remember that there's another 500,000 lost to, the general fund transfer. So, and costs go up. So the combination of, fighting the increased costs and the lower revenues is what's pinching us. And that's why you see the reduction in the one staffer. And then the other place where, what you don't see is the stuff that we're not doing and haven't done for a long time. We used to have a very active slurry seal program. When you first came on council,
Yeah.
you never see that program anymore because we had to cut that. A lot of the paving that you see is very thin and not very spread out. So as we eat up more and more money with the electric bill, with the other maintenance activities that we have to do, a lot of the contract paving, a lot of the those kinds of things just we just don't have the money to do that. So that's where we get pinched.
Here's my issue. I think part of your proposed budget is to cut the million that was going from the general fund into street maintenance.
$500,000.
$500,000. Well, it used to be.
It used to be $1 million. Now
It
it's
used to be $1
$500,000.
million. So now, street maintenance will, under this proposal, will receive $500,000.
Correct.
So I have two questions. What's the cost of reducing that street maintenance to $250,000? And then the second question is, what's the cost of just not trimming every tree every year?
We have looked at that. There is no way that we can. We have basically one tree crew, and that crew is engaged every day, and they're engaged in. They're not out trimming every tree every day. We're doing bare minimum, and a lot of what they do is response. So, hey, we have a project coming through, so the trees have to be trimmed because there's a project coming through. There's a lot of that, or there's a safety issue, or those kinds of things. So there's really, there's nothing else to cut in the tree trimming arena. If we were to cut another $250,000, my sense is we'd be cutting more staff at that point, because there's just nothing else.
So that's what that money goes for, is for staff? It's not for contracts for asphalt? Or?
Well, and materials and services, but that would be a pretty significant, we're to the point where it'd be significant, so you'd probably look, I don't have that in front of me, but I would assume that it'd be a combination of staff and materials and services.
Mr. Chair, I don't know how we ask questions and they get information later. I missed that part of the meeting. So is it possible to do that, or are we pretty much voting on this tonight?
No, you go ahead and...
Yeah, I just want to know what the impact of that would be.
Of an additional $250,000 cut.
Yeah,
We'll bring that forward.
And then the other, this is what we talked about, Linda. So I, in all fairness, made Ms. Norris aware that I was going to ask some of these questions.
That's no problem.
The 4 parks positions, Thomas talks about leveraging and having great volunteers doing projects in our parks. Without those, we've had this discussion about 4 parks positions 2 years ago, and one of the concerns that the Budget Committee and Council were raised back then is who do the volunteers report to?
That's correct.
So we replace them with inmates, they don't have anybody to call, they don't volunteer in the parks?
We will have, on weekends especially, and that my presentation spoke to that, we will have fewer staff for volunteer activities. So it will mean that either the volunteers will do the projects on their own, or if it's complicated enough, we simply will not be able to support that kind of activity.
About 5 years ago, we got to a point in parks maintenance where it was a big problem, where we essentially didn't do any maintenance from fall till ball season, and we didn't take care of the restrooms and a couple other things. Are we back to that critical bare minimum?
Well,
let nature take its course?
We are, we continue to look for different ways of doing business. For example, we have chemical toilets at a lot of neighborhood parks. Maybe we can remove the chemical toilets at neighborhood parks. They were never really intended to have restrooms anyway, so that's one opportunity. It's a very small amount, but that's one opportunity. There's another opportunity to not water, late summer, and therefore do less mowing. But what we have is a situation where the few staff that we have do a lot of things. So once a parks operations employee goes to a park, they're not just going to the park to clean the toilets
Right.
or take care of the garbage. They are doing everything that needs to be. They are a property manager for that park. So as what we try and do, and there's a discussion that we were having earlier this week, is that employee touches everything. So what we have to start looking at is, well, can that employee or those employees show up to that park less often and redistribute the resource that we have. So yeah, it could mean that the lawns is a little shabbier, that the litter maybe doesn't get picked up as often, and those are the kinds of things that you'll begin to see. But as I said before, we are going to do the best that we can do with what we have, and we never want to be in a situation where the community feels punished, but at some point, there just isn't enough resource.
Is the $109,000 that we're paying to plan for the park trail and how the parks connects, is that the same fund that pays for the parks positions that won't be there anymore?
No.
I mean, we're planning and yet we're not maintaining, so that's the question I have.
The 109,000 for what? I'm sorry,
The 109,000 that we're planning for spending, I think in your presentation.
Oh, for the
park
civic center?
connectivity.
It's all part of the general, well, it's
yes,
general
I'm
fund
sorry,
money.
It is general fund money.
So it's the same account that pays for the folks that maintain the parks? I don't want to get my funds confused.
Sure, thank you. And the other thing about
That's all I
parks
have.
that we've talked about is as we go forward, because as we've said, we have to cut some positions this year and probably looking at about another 40 positions next year. And for the counselors and the budget committee members who've been here for a while, you realize that's going to be quite a challenge. So as we look at it, and our park superintendent and other people, we want to make sure that we're making decisions about maintenance, that we don't start losing the turf, that parks are still safe. But we'll be looking at how much time can we really spend maintaining school district-owned land that's right next to city parks. How many flower beds should we really have? Are there ways that we can reduce the labor-intensive maintenance in all the parks? Is there any difference if a park has 12 trash cans or 9 trash cans? There's a difference in terms of how long it takes staff to pick it up. But we are going to be looking at a lot of service level options this next year to see what works, what doesn't work, what's the best way to save money as we go forward. Because I'm anticipating without additional revenue that those service levels will continue to decrease over the next 2 years.
I'm going to just follow up on Councilor Clem's question because I don't want, and then Councilor Clausen, I apologize jumping ahead of you, but I want to follow up on the electric bill. And I am interested, having read about brownouts on city streetlights as one of the strategies that cities nationally use to deal with some of these costs. I would like to ask you, not for this meeting, but perhaps at some future time, either in these deliberations, to bring us some sort of plan to provide some sort of alternative funding to guarantee streetlights. I represent
Certainly.
Central Salem. It's very important. I'd like to understand how we can maintain parks, put more money having better streets, and have streetlights that are guaranteed to be lit. So I would appreciate it just sort of looking at this same, I think the same train of thought that Councilor Clem has, if you could deliver that.
One of the SCI projects was the streetlight funding, so they did an outstanding job for us, and we will bring that back out, and they had some great recommendations for us.
Okay. Member Clausen.
I have a couple of questions. First is, the first was, are we planning on making a recommendation tonight? Because this is my first time looking at this. I'm not ready. I just want to make sure, be clear that we're not, or we are, making a recommendation on this budget tonight.
You don't want to?
No.
Okay.
I'm not ready.
We'll stick with you on that.
That's the first question. The next one was along those lines of electric. That's one of the things that popped up to me was on page 20, we got a $260,000 reduction in sorry, not 260, $216,000 reduction in electric bills. Do we have a cheaper rate now, or?
No, what we have found is that, over time, we found that there was a little left over, so
Okay.
we were just over budgeting.
Just
a little bit.
realigning.
Yeah.
Okay, and then if I may, I got one more, and then probably, I've got a few more, but I don't need to do it on the floor tonight. The one more question was, if you could walk me through, just real briefly, the $500,000 reduction in transfer from the general fund, and along with those lines, where do I find the street maintenance as a line item in here?
Okay.
To see what
I'm
we
going to
did
let
last
Mark Bechtel, who is the expert in
Okay.
in streets maintenance, kind of.
I'm not looking for anything
at
real
least
in
walk you
depth,
through
but
in
just real
general,
short.
if not in the specifics of the book.
Mark Bechtel, Parks and Transportation Services Manager. Our operating budget and the transportation services component, if you look at a $500,000 less in general fund transfer for street maintenance, and you look at about $200,000 less than anticipated gas tax revenue, we cut our budget essentially $700,000 since the current year, fiscal year 11-12. So that's, getting to Councilor Clem's question, why are you cutting street maintenance when your revenue is increasing? It's not so much that it's increasing as it is we're not getting as much as we anticipated. The current fiscal year right now, we are about $239,000 behind in just what our budget target is for revenue and gas tax revenue. So, Councilor, can you maybe clarify your question a little bit more just generally, or?
Yeah, I guess I heard there's $500,000 less in street maintenance because of this $500,000 less coming from general fund. So the question was, where was that money coming, the source of that revenue that, as it got into general fund? And then where do I find that we're $500,000 less in street paving in the book?
Okay, in the book, to answer your first question, the source of that transfer has been water sewer franchise fees that are transferred to the general fund, and then general fund transfer to streets. The actual number, if I can get to
The source is on page 93 under non-departmental in the first book. You'll see that very top sentence on page 93 is the transfer to Public Works for street maintenance.
And then in book 2, page 7, under 39110, $500,000.
Which page again, please?
In book 2,
Book 2.
page 7.
7. Thank you.
It's the last item on that page, interfund transfers.
But that's the resource. Where's the expense that's showing me that we're going less on
Okay, that's the resource. What you don't see in your budget book is just a line item for street maintenance. It's all parsed out into materials and services, personal services, capital outlay, all that. So what we can do is if you'd like to have more of a summary of what street maintenance expenditures are, we can bring that back to you. Because we actually have them by programs, all the different maintenance programs.
I might just talk with him between, and if there's something, I'll bring it up next meeting. Is that okay?
Oh,
I don't want to tie us up here on something that I don't terribly know what I'm looking for even,
Okay.
so I need to dig into it a little bit.
That's great.
Yeah, these are not program budgets, but we can bring you a program budget summary of the different maintenance programs.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Member Dickey.
Thank you. I'm looking at page 3 where you have the Public Works performance measures, and I've got a couple questions. Okay, so it shows for the years 2010 and then the year 2011, the average cost per acre to maintain different parks. Neighborhood parks, the average cost went down. Community parks went up a little bit. Large urban parks a little bit. Riverfront Park a lot. And I'm just wondering if that is a result of just doing less maintenance on the parks or more maintenance as it was, or like a redistribution of how you were doing it, or what would account for that, and how could we expect that to be different in the proposed budget?
You know, I'm looking around at the 4 people that might have an answer, and they're all giving me the deer in the headlights look. You know, this is the result of the way we account. So this is what actually happened. You know, if I would venture to guess, is that we're just, you know, just day-to-day reallocating resources and moving away from, you know, it's easy to mow a little less in the neighborhood park. And, you know, we always, you know, we have our gems, right? Our gems are Riverfront Park and Bush Park, and those have to be, and then the softball complex at Wallace Marine Park. So those are always going to be in top form. So if those have to be in top form and they need a little extra, or we're a little short, then something's going to pay, and what's going to pay is the smaller neighborhood parks. So I'm surmising that is what's happening here. But Mark maybe
Mr.
has
Fernandez,
a
just
little
a sec.
more.
I want to get you out of the headlights for a second. I just want to check with you. Wouldn't it have a lot to do with the way Riverfront Park is used and the kind of maintenance it takes to come back behind the uses?
Yes, yes, Counselor, you're very correct. Riverfront Park had a tremendous amount of use last summer. We had a large number of very large festivals and events, and so the expenditures to renovate that park between each event and just the general maintenance, that might explain some of the increase there. Another point I make is that you get a better economy of scale as the park gets larger. Neighborhood parks are small parks, but they have a lot of things in them. Larger parks just are larger, and so there's a lot of mowing, but there's not a lot of necessarily other things involved in it. So you do get some economy of scale as the park gets larger.
Thank you.
If I could, I'm sorry. If I could, Mr. Chair, Member Clausen, on page 14 under Public Works, you'll see these types of program pages, and so that will show you in a large, roll up that street maintenance is $3.7 million, and how many employees are in street maintenance. Yes, it's page 14 under Public Works. So when you want to know just generally how much does this program area cost, that would be a good place to go.
Member Dickey, did you have any? No. Okay, Member Bailey.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Peter, I would just appreciate, as a new member here, appreciate your response and maybe interpretation of what Mr. Beasley said about the tax on the sewer water funds for other issues. And sometimes those are unavoidable, but I would like your response to that.
Sure. Very simply, the franchise fee is a fee that is charged to all of the utilities in the city of Salem, private and public. And it is simply the way the utility as a business operates is it's a cost of doing business, like the electric bill and like personnel costs. On the more, and I'll tee up the city manager, but on the on the kind of the budgetary process, it's $2.5 million that if it's not paid by the utility, it's another $2.5 million hole that has to be plugged in the general fund. And when you see, for example, Councilor Clem thinking, boy, we need more money for A, B, and C. Well, instead of trying to plug a $200,000 hole, we'd be trying to plug a $2.5 million hole. So there's kind of two sides of the coin. From the utility side, it's a business expense that we have to pay, that the utility has to pay every year. And on the general fund side, it's a revenue that's realized, and in the times that we've had for a long time, would make matters even worse. So that's where we're at.
Well, I understand the last part of that, but I guess what I want to be clear on, and for the public to be clear on, is that in terms of budgeting, we are to treat the public utility, the water, sewer, stormwater, just as a private utility is treated in terms of Comcast or PGE or PP&L or whoever. It's all part of occupying public rights of way and maintaining those services as they impact the city and its general fund. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
for that clarification. All right. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. I have a question that, again, on that same page, page 1, actually, go back to page 1 of the Public Works Department summary. In the
Yes.
very beginning where revenue and expenses are listed. Under the permits and fees, I noticed that the amount proposed for 2012-13 is actually lower than it's been in the last few years. And I was wondering, as you just said, there were more events and what did you say? Events and special uses at the Riverfront Park. The cost of maintaining the park went up. Are we charging less to people who rent the park?
No. Right. Some of this, I'm getting the whisper in the back, but I already knew the answer. So,
Oh, okay.
remember that we moved recreation services and softball to the general fund. So there's a chunk of money that would have been here that's now in the general fund under recreation services. So that's part of what's accounting for this reduction, for the reduction that you see here. There's really not a reduction. I think the more important question that you're asking, Mayor, is what are we charging? And that is something that we look at and continue to look at, because there are some areas where we feel we could charge more. And that's part of the discussion that I had as part of my presentation. And either if you don't see it in this year's fee proposal, you'll see it in future fee proposals for just looking for opportunities to charge higher fees for events, charging for fees in some places. For example, we have a fee if you have more than 50 people, even at a place like Bush, which is free, you're supposed to pay a permit. Some people pull the permit, some people don't. Do we want to get more strict about that? I don't think we ever philosophically, we never want to recommend a situation where our citizens can't use our parks. But where it costs us more to come in and clean up afterwards, we need to really start looking at that and maybe start realizing we don't, I think in a lot of parks activities, we don't collect what we spend. So there is, I think there's some amount there. It'll cost more. And you know that every time you raise fees, you hear from the public doesn't want to pay more, but we just are kind of in an economic reality. The same is true at Center 50 Plus. I think there's some opportunities there. We want to continue to serve our population, but is there some opportunities to charge a little more for the use of that facility so that facility can sustain itself and can have money reserved to improve it, et cetera. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. In terms of this line item specifically, we have to add up this one and 101, and my guess is that it's a little higher than than last year.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you. And
Thank
I
you, Mayor.
appreciate your explanation. And I'm a big believer that the city should actually operate as much as it can like a private business. And we certainly know that hotels and event centers would charge what it really costs to maintain and provide the facility. And maybe we need to do a little better job of looking at what we do charge for special events, big rentals. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Member Clem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Are we doing water and sewer fund right now as well, or are we
Yes.
just doing public
Yes.
works? Page 28 of water and sewer, Peter, please. I'm looking for, and I have two questions on this page. I'm looking for the transfer now from Public Works to the airport. When we discussed the airport master plan, where would maybe this is for later.
It's the payment, not a transfer, a payment for
It's a-
use of
okay.
the airport land is what you
Okay,
meant, isn't
yeah,
it?
I think that's payment or transfer, but I stand
Counselor?
corrected.
It's page 35.
Okay.
And it is in land rental. That's the second big line item there, 53520.
The storage facility,
Right.
the 121,000?
Right. And one thing to note there is we are expanding our use at the airport properties there. If you'll recall, several years ago, we were in discussions with the council about siting a vector waste transfer station. We had talked about acquiring a little piece of the Seneca property near shops. and the council at the time told us that that really, the council couldn't support doing that. We still need that facility, and what we've decided is that the next best location for that is at this location at the airport across from Airway Drive. And so our plan is we've secured that land, and in fact, I think it was on, I didn't talk about it, but it was on the slide. The Vactor Waste Transfer Station will be constructed here in the next year or two at that site, and that's what that's the land rental.
And
for
this
that is.
$121,050 is really just a new expense to the Water and Sewer Fund. There's no revenue that is generated that came
No.
along with this new expense.
No, we will look for opportunities. You know, PGE has Vactor Waste, Northwest Natural has Vactor Waste, Marion County has Vactor Waste. So we will look for opportunities to, once it's built, if there's an opportunity to entice other users within any extra capacity that we have, we will look for those opportunities to see if we can generate some additional revenues.
And
But there's no additional revenue. This is just, this is strictly an expense.
We aren't to that point yet. Back to page 28 would be account 35215. These interdepartmental reimbursements in inter-city charges are always interesting to me.
Right.
Again, it's 35215. It was 26,000, then it was 2,000 the next year, then it's 235,000 almost. So did we change our accounting system? And if so,
Yeah.
did that affect all the departments?
No, it's a move. Some of these transfers are intra-departmental. So this is a case where some of our planning staff moved from in this case, they moved from transportation, they moved from 155 to 310. But they're still doing transportation planning, so 155 has to pay for them. So it's just a reorganization of.
So I would expect to see in transportation a decrease of that amount.
There would be you're in the resource page, so this is a collection.
Right.
So in transportation, there would be an expense for that amount that's coming this direction.
Okay.
Right.
But unless you know that,
right,
you can't balance it out. So where in transportation is it? I mean, it's a big book in front of me, and I got it tonight, so.
There's one of you, there's 5 of them, so.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
We'll get that to you, Councilor.
Why don't we then move on to urban renewal?
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chair Bennett. Oh, page 17, Councilor Clem. So just to get, I'm sorry, Councilor, just to get this last. So yeah, the first 53815, transportation planning support 234,560, and that's the expense, and then the revenue is gathered in 310. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fernandez.
Is it that one, Linda, or is it this one? It's this one, right?
This one.
It's all good.
Thank you.
Ms. Norris, as you start, could you direct us to where in the book to find this so we can kind of, as we watch the pictures, look at the numbers?
Yes, this is in book 2, and I'm down here again without my book. So let me, I'm sorry. Book 3, I'm sorry.
Yeah. The last
It's in the very, very back of your 3-ring binder. It's about a 70-page document, so it flushes up right against the back.
If you look at the last blue divider sheet, and it's page 19 right after that. Well, is that, am I in the right place, Deborah? Excuse me. Yeah.
From what I see on your desktops, it looks like most of you have found it, except for Mr. Nanke. Oh, you're there.
It's
You're
the
there.
last table of contents.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Is book 3.
That's the last table of contents tab. There's 3 of them in the book, and then there's a summaries tab, a debt service tab, and a construction tab, and that all represents your urban renewal agency.
Great.
And I will say, at the end of this meeting, Ms. Neville is going to go through what's in the book so you know what's where. We probably should have done that first. I'm sorry. We'll do that first next time. Okay. So I'm here now to present the budget message for the urban renewal area. This overview will include an explanation of what it is, how it's funded, and how we use those funds. And then Mr. Wells, our Urban Development Director, will give you the specific FY 12-13 budget for urban renewal areas. So the Urban Renewal Agency, again, is a separate governmental unit of the City of Salem. It's responsible for administering and implementing the urban renewal plans in our 8 urban renewal areas, which will turn into 7 in a few months. The purpose of the agency is to invest in key locations and opportunity sites or in designated geographic areas of the city. We invest in public infrastructure, and that helps open blighted areas to private investment and projects through an intergovernmental agreement with the City of Salem. Oh, excuse me, to create jobs and enhance community economic prosperity. So the board is comprised of the mayor and the city council, who act as the Urban Renewal Agency board. Again, I'm the executive director of the agency, and the department staff facilitate the projects and the plans in the urban renewal areas. As I said, we have 8 urban renewal areas. And those include Riverfront Downtown, Pringle Creek, North Gateway, West Salem, Fairview Industries, Mill Creek Industrial Park, McGill-Crescent, and South Waterfront. In a minute, I'll show you a slide and a map of those. So revenue generated from each of the areas are managed as separate funds and can only be used for projects that are both in the plan and projects that are in that area. The agency relies on advisory boards for 3 of the 8 urban renewal areas, which help us plan for the future and then make recommendations to the agency about spending. So how's urban renewal funded? And we fund this with tax increment, as you can see on the slide. So when we have an urban renewal area that's established, the base is frozen and the taxing districts continue to get that level of property tax from the area. And then over time, and as investments are made, that tax rate increases, and that's the tax increment, and that's the amount of money that helps fund these projects and programs in all of the urban renewal areas. And each fund is managed separately. So here's the map that shows where the 8 areas are. And as I've said, Pringle Creek is scheduled to close mid-year this year. This shows what's happening in terms of tax increment revenue. And of course, in any urban renewal area, what you hope is this public infrastructure investment actually leverages private investment. So you can see the riverfront URAs had steady growth. North Gateway had pretty dramatic growth. It's leveling off a little bit in the next 2 years because of that revaluation of the Compass properties within that area. So that'll go down for a couple of years. And then you can see that Fairview has remained pretty steady. West Salem, we're very happy, and I know a few years ago we were very thrilled to see that we're starting to get tax increment revenue now, and as Mr. Wells will explain, we have a number of exciting projects going on in that area. Mill Creek Industrial Park, with the development there, we're seeing an increase. McGill-Crest has stayed fairly flat, and South Waterfront, because of the revaluation of the projects in that area and taking down some of the buildings at the South Waterfront URA, has gone down over time. Salem has used urban renewal areas on a variety of public and private projects in the recent years to fund infrastructure, as I've said, for new development, to improve and construct parks, to provide leveraging funds for property owners to improve their properties. These have all been good investments in our community. We'll continue to use urban renewal to leverage private investment and look for ways to create additional partnerships. And one example of that is the 295 Church Street projects. That was a public-private partnership. you can see and you know your Union Street Railroad Bridge used URA funds. Center 50 Plus, our senior center, was built with those funds. Salem Conference Center, improvements to privately owned properties, and that's some of the facade improvements you'll see on the buildings downtown. And then in Mill Creek Corporate Center, as an example, we were able to recruit the Home Depot Rapid Distribution Center. So that's a very brief, but I know the time's getting late and you've been sitting for a long time, a brief budget message, but Mr. Wells will come now and present the 2012-13 budget recommendation.
As they move into the whispering seats.
Yes. Yes.
Good evening. I'm John. I'm changing the podium here just for your attention. My name is John Wales. I'm the director of the Urban Development Department, and we in Urban Development manage many funds for the city. But tonight we're just talking about three primary ones that are for the Urban Renewal Agency. So you're going to see me on many nights over the next few weeks. With me tonight is Renee Frazier, who's our manager of our finance and administration, and also with me tonight is our new Assistant Director, Doug Rux, Courtney Knox, who manages our Economic Development Program, and Sheree Wargren, who manages our Downtown Revitalization section. So to begin, as Ms. Norris said, that we're here to talk about the urban renewal funds. There are primarily three that our department manages. They're the debt fund, the construction fund, and the Salem Conference Center. Just quickly, an overview. The debt fund manages the revenues expenditures associated with the agency's debt. Basically, we take in that fund, the tax increment that Ms. Norris identified that's above the frozen tax base in urban renewal areas, and that we make debt payments with that, with that tax increment. The construction fund manages the revenue and expenditures that are associated with the projects and programs within the Urban Renewal Agency. So the activities within that fund are that we receive proceeds from our debt issuance, and that we then spend those funds on programs and projects that are allocated and approved within our urban renewal plans and that are adopted and recommended by the agency. The third fund, actually, the Salem Conference Center's got two funds that we operate. One is the operation and revenue, the revenue expenditures of our operating fund, and then there is a gain-loss reserve fund that we manage, which is really a fund to cover capital needs of any operating shortfalls or unexpected capital expenditures. So what I thought I'd do, let me just give you an idea. What was mentioned earlier is that the Urban Renewal Agency has a budget of $45 million. About 60% of that is in our construction fund. You can see $26 million. About almost 30% of it is our debt fund, and then the conference center funds account for about 11% of the budget. Based on this allocation, most of my remarks tonight are going to be directed to the construction fund and debt fund. I thought it'd be helpful just to go through the 8 urban renewal areas and give you some highlights as to what this budget represents for that we're proposing for 12-13. As Ms. Norris said, Pringle Creek, one of our older urban renewal areas, is scheduled to close in 2012. And the monies that we have available this year will be allocated to that effort. When you look at the urban renewal areas that we manage, many of these programs are over many years. Some of them are sequenced, and projects are sequenced in a certain sequence. Some of them are carryovers of work that got started in previous years and are going to be finished in the coming year. And Riverfront Downtown, which is our largest URA with a capital budget of about $10 million, just over $10 million, reflects that. The programs that this and projects that this budget is proposing is a continuation of some of our economic development and major projects that are currently underway. For example, the Minto-Brown Island Bridge, and it is continuing with its conceptual design and with its funding and possibly permitting in the coming year. The Toolbox program is continuing. This budget represents about $1.7 million in loans and another $500,000 in recommended grants for our Downtown Toolbox program. It also includes the parking, continued improvements that are needed in our parking structures. There's about $1 million in this budget for the improvement of the Chemeketa, capital improvements to Chemeketa Garage. That will be both HVAC system, chillers, and elevator repairs that are being proposed. But this program, the downtown riverfront budget also reflects some new direction that the agency has given us this year in trying to look forward and trying to make some decisions and getting a baseline of information about investments that are anticipated by the agency coming in future years when there's more bonding and funding capacity. And there's 3 projects in particular that have been approved by the agency board that are reflected in this budget. One is our demonstration program, which is a concentrated investment of up to $1 million in projects in a concentrated area of the downtown. And the intent here is to partner and to attract a partnership with a large developer that will come in and invest in a way that we haven't yet had the resources to do. So that program is reflected in this budget, along with our mobility study that's looking at the way that the street system and circulation system within the downtown are functioning, all and combined with an investment strategy that is linked to the mobility study in North Downtown to try to help sort out what are some of the barriers and what are some of the opportunities for mixed-use housing investments in the downtown riverfront URA. So those projects are new, and they're intended to really to give the agency board a foundation understanding of where the opportunities are in the future for investment. Fairview Industrial Park is one of our older industrial parks. It's actually slated to close, has a closing date of 2014. We've completed most of the projects in that urban renewal area. You may recall last year the agency board recommended a pilot small business program and funded $1 million to attract small business entrepreneurs to grow and expand in this area. That program, I'm happy to say, has been very successful. We have funded 2 loans to 2 small businesses that are doing very well. We're in discussions with a third. This budget recommends an additional $500,000 to continue funding that program because of the demand that we have seen and the ability to attract new jobs and investment in the community or in that urban renewal area. There is about $1 million in the construction fund that is unspecified. Urban renewal, the Fairview industrial area focuses on, or does include, a portion of the airport, the south end of the airport, where we're looking at increasing economic activity and trying to stimulate development over there. So we'll be coming back to the agency board with some recommendations on projects for the remaining funding. I believe there will either be a combination of the airport investment in infrastructure, as well as we're taking a look at some other stimulus for business to try to create jobs and attract jobs in that area as well. The North Gateway area is, if you're familiar with it, is the Portland Road north of downtown. It's one of our larger urban renewal areas, but the story there is that several years ago, as we have reached the end of our projects. There's really one project left, and it's a large one. It is the second half of Portland Road. And so a lot of the activities that and projects and programs that we have been working on in the past few years and are continuing in this proposed budget are geared to making that project successful. One of the ways to do that is that we need to pay down our existing debt, and we're doing it at an accelerated rate so that by 2018 we'll be able to invest and issue new bond or new debt to finish that Portland Road project. So this budget in this year continues that theme. We're going to be looking to act it includes the acquisition of the remaining right-of-way that needs to be done to complete the Portland Road project. We are starting design of the Portland Road, the second phase, and we are completing the underground of the utilities at the intersection of Portland Road and Hyacinth. West Salem is an exciting story. It is one of our newer urban renewal areas and has been has identified a theme and a priority to focus on Edgewater and 2nd Street area to create a Main Street image for retail and commercial development. And we are at a place where we now have enough tax increment that we can incur debt and do a major project. The major signature project for the area that's been selected is the 2nd Street redevelopment project. This budget that we are proposing for this coming year will include the design of that project. It'll include continuation of trail and park improvements in Wallace Marine Park, as well as some pedestrian lighting and wayfinding along Edgewater Street. That's a process that started this year, and we're going to continue. We do have the capacity to, as I said, to issue up to $3.5 million of new debt for this area. It's actually the first time this area has been able to bond or to accrue debt. But we expect that the actual construction of 2nd Street will occur in 2013. Mill Creek, Ms. Norris mentioned, is one of our larger urban renewal areas geographically in the southeast section of the city. The major projects which have been discussed tonight by Public Work have to do with the construction of College Reservoir, and I didn't realize the name had been changed to Mill Creek Reservoir, so that will be that's good to know. It also represents funding for the second phase or the second year of the wetland construction project, which is underway out there. If you've been past Mill Creek, you'll see a large area in the center of the park that has been graded for wetlands and bioswales and stormwater control, and that will be planted this coming year, and that's what this budget reflects. Improvements and undergrounding of the electric lines, that's the overhead distribution lines along Amsville Highway is part of this budget, and it also includes some sewer and water improvements along Amsville Highway as well. McGilchrist is one of our smaller urban renewal areas. It has been slow in collecting tax increment. We've not yet incurred debt in this URA. It is a single project URA, meaning that we have one project, and it is the upgrade of McGilchrist Road. We are doing some design on the section of the road between 22nd and 25th Street, but other than that, this URA is on hold until being able to do any larger projects until the tax increment increases. South Waterfront, which is our newest urban renewal area, has also been slow in developing. As Ms. Norris mentioned, there have been reductions in the values on the Meridian and on the Boise property across, or the old Boise property across the street from us here, which has slowed the tax increment considerably.
But there are some significant things still being, projects that we are proposing for this coming year. We are use some of the funding that we have there as leverage for our grants. And it's also being used for some of our trail design that we're looking, once we land them or build the Minto Island Bridge, that there's a trail that will connect to the Minto Island Brown Park. So those are the smaller projects, but they're absolutely very important to the program. And finally, why do we do this, and why is urban renewal important? For the city, it's an important tool. It's central to our economic development strategy. Economic development is not something that we do alone. We do it in partnership. And what the city brings to the table, or can offer through urban renewal, is infrastructure, primarily infrastructure, making property ready so that development, private investment can occur, all for the purpose of improving the tax base in our community, creating jobs, and eliminating blight. So we think this budget continues that message, and we think we have a good strategy and partnerships in place to move our program forward. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any? Member Berger.
You mentioned a loan program in Fairview Industrial Park.
Could you get to your mic?
You mentioned a loan program in Fairview Industrial Park where you had two businesses that got $1 million loan, and you're looking at adding another $500,000 for another business?
Actually, there were two businesses, and the way the program works, that business can come in and meet, and if they qualify, and these are for small businesses, they have to have revenues of under $2 million. It's targeted for entrepreneurs. It's targeted for businesses that are doing very well, and most of them are local, already in this community, but because of the economic climate, aren't able to secure funding to grow. And we've had two businesses, and I believe the amount is up to three. Okay, and so the way it works is that they can apply for a loan on terms that are quite favorable, and if they create jobs, portions of that loan can be forgiven. And the intent of the program is to encourage small businesses to invest, to grow, and to create, and basically to create jobs. So and what's happened is that two businesses have applied. They've actually gone into the same space. It's very similar to an incubator space for food processing. One is is Organic Fresh Fingers, and they provide food for preschool and kindergarten lunch programs. The other is Wandering Angus, which is a beverage company. They are sharing the same facility, sharing the same, not all the same, obviously not the same equipment, but have applied and are in that program. We are working on a third company right now who've applied for part of this loan. And so the three of them together, if this third one succeeds, will have used the $1 million.
Go ahead.
Typically, my understanding with urban renewal is we pay for infrastructure, which would then bring jobs. This sounds like a program where we are basically buying jobs from someone.
Good point.
I mean, is that a typical use of urban renewal funds?
Well, actually, the improvements the loans that we have made are for capital improvements. And so they've gone into the base building, they've gone into equipment, they've gone into the building, and we've invested, given the money for those kinds of, that's what the urban renewal funds were for capital improvements, and those improvements have to stay within the urban renewal area. And it was enabling them to get into larger space and basically grow. Good question.
Just out of curiosity, what is the project on McGilchrist that we're all waiting for? Could you remind us all what we're doing up there?
It's a street. It is a major upgrade to McGilchrist Road. It's a
road and sidewalk.
And sidewalks and widening.
From where to where?
Yes.
From where to where?
Oh, it's between 25th Street and 12th Street.
Okay.
It's a major,
What's going to happen when this happens? What's the outcome? You build the street and sidewalk, bikeway, I assume, and streetlights. What happens then?
well, it will allow development to occur. Right now, new development going in there have to pay for a significant portion of the street upgrade. The McGilchrist Road cannot handle much more development. I don't know if Peter is still here or not, but Peter's
He's
still
waiting
here. If I'm not explaining this right,
But
please explain.
what I want to understand, I guess, is traditionally, development pays for its portion of the street that it's on. I mean, is there something that is in the offing we don't know about?
Yes.
If we do this, they will come?
Yes, very, very perceptive, Chair Bennett.
Thank you.
McGilchrist is a mess and has been a mess for, I've been here 17 years, and the first place that they took me out to look at was McGilchrist and said, we really need to improve this street. And we've never had the money to do it. It's a very expensive improvement. The problem that development has there is our growth management laws, Salem Revised Code Chapter 66, requires linking improvements in that area. So any development on McGilchrist either has to improve the road all the way to 25th, which is a long run, or can do a shorter run to Pringle, but has to go over the railroad. And what we found is that we had developers that wanted to develop, had users, but could not afford that level of expense. So it wasn't just the frontage improvement, they had to do a linking improvement. So we searched for a number of years for a solution. We tried to see if an LID would work. We tried any number of solutions, and the one solution that seemed to work was to create an urban renewal area, because when we did that, that street improvement is essentially funded. For the effects of Chapter 66, it's funded. So Salmon Run out there, the new development on the Walling property, was able to come in and develop, and only then had to pay for its frontage improvements. And what they did there is they paid us a fee in lieu, so that when we do it, we have money in the bank for their frontage, but they didn't have to improve the road all the way to 25th or all the way to the railroad.
Well, help me out here on the increment then, and let's use Salmon Run as an example. If I recall, its major tenant now will be a tax-exempt organization when Social Security moves out there. How does the tax increment work in that kind of system then?
Not very well. Unfortunately, that wasn't what was envisioned for development in that area. When a public entity such as the federal government goes in and leases space, it takes it off the tax rolls. That works against urban renewal, and it works against what we're trying to achieve.
I guess the thing, I'm just putting this together as we're talking. I mean, I didn't realize as I'm thinking about this just gets worse for me. I don't know about other members, but I guess what I would like to understand, we're doing this, what could be major investment. It clearly is too large for single developers or even multiple developers, and I certainly understand sections of the linkage being high-priced. I guess the thing that concerns me is that there seems to be no protection for our incremental expectation. You know, we promise everybody when we freeze the taxes, and I mean the county, the city, the school district and others, that there will be an incremental gain, and then as we start talking about making improvements where the opportunity exists, somebody takes advantage of it and gives it to the feds or gives it to the state. And I'm just a little concerned, and this one I think is, I have questions about its future, and I guess at some point during the next year, I would like to understand its future and how it works under this current situation. We've frozen taxes. I don't want to stop it. I just want to make sure I understand and we understand what we're doing here and whether or not we've got a future out there. Councilor Klein.
Yeah, Councilor Bennett, I appreciate bringing up the subject. The question I have is maybe a technical one and for answer later. But if the tax base is frozen and someone isn't paying, does that mean in the allocations of taxes to the balance of the property owners out there, do they pay more? Because there has to be a certain amount that goes into the urban renewal. When we pass a levy. I'm not using the right term, Linda, but we actually assess the balance of the property owners. So are the nearby property owners paying for what the federal government isn't paying for in rent to property taxes?
I don't believe so, but why don't we bring back a more complete response to, or I don't know, Mr. Tosh, if you have anything to add now.
You get the amount of the increment, whatever the increment is. And so if the property is lent to a tax-exempt owner, that money doesn't become part of the increment, so you don't collect it.
Right.
Okay, but we have to collect a certain amount, so...
No, you collect whatever the increment is.
Okay.
And if that increment is reduced as a result of a plant closure, as happened with Sumco,
sure,
or because the property is rented or leased to a non-taxable owner, that increment goes down, and that's all you get.
And the other question is, could we from now on, I don't know how we clean up this one, but could we from now on make stipulations within our development agreements that if in fact it's rented to a nonprofit or a government agency, that there be some recompense for what that increment was, so that the urban renewal street improvements can still move forward? Is that something that can be put?
The only way you're going to get there is, there are two ways to get there. One of them is you do it through your zoning and you limit the areas where you have government use.
Right.
And the other way is we would have to be a party to an agreement that somehow becomes a contractual obligation. So if we had an agreement with a developer and we partially funded the development of a project, we could, as a matter of contract law, enter into an agreement that if that property is rented to an owner who doesn't pay taxes, that there's an additional payment that comes back to the city. I mean, there are ways to get there, but
they're not easy.
Not necessarily easy.
Well, I just want to. I don't mean to belabor this, I just think it's such an interesting example of urban renewal and how it can and can't work at times. Is the real problem comes if we start to bond this thing. Once we start down that road and we don't have some sort of protection at the back end, couldn't you almost fall off? And your problem, I tell you what it is, I read too much about what happened in Kaiser, and it makes me uncomfortable. I'll be real honest with you. So I want to make sure on this one that we would, and I know you would, I'm not suggesting, it's just, it doesn't seem to all fit together.
We in fact got into, we didn't end up at the point where we were going to default on our bonds, but when the Sumco plant closed in the North Gateway urban renewal area, that was a substantial financial hit to the area, and it was kind of a wake-up call that if you have an urban renewal area that relies on one major development for the generation of your increment, that can create financial problems in the future. Fortunately, it didn't pan out that way in North Gateway, but it means that you have to look more carefully when you're forming your urban renewal areas to make sure that they're not really dependent upon one or two developments to provide your tax increment, because you can't guarantee what's going to happen in the future.
And Mr. Chair, we do have a work session that we're scheduling for council, I believe in May, to talk about some of these issues related to zoning. The issue of what kind of uses can be in which zones and which areas is also one that the Unified Development Code is addressing. So we'll have a lot more discussion about this with the City Council.
Yeah. Well, I just want to highlight this because I think as a budget matter, it has, certainly it looks at only 500,000. I don't think we see the potential for the real downside here, and we ought to be well aware of it and advising you of our concern.
Right along those lines, does it take council approval to issue bonds for an urban renewal area or for, say, streets and bridges bond, or is that just a staff decision?
I see Mr. Tosh coming to the podium. This must be a quicker, or longer answer than I was going to give you.
Well, it's not really, but maybe let's just stay at the podium for a while. No, the agency has to issue them. It's not a council action. Because remember, the urban renewal agency is a separate municipal corporation. But they're a form of revenue bond, really. They're called tax increment bonds. And I believe that we have bonds issued for North Gateway, for Riverfront Downtown, and I don't believe we have any debt outstanding anywhere else, do we, John?
We have debt at Mill Creek, but that's
Mill
not
Creek.
from bonding, that's from a loan.
Right, but bonds, in terms of the tax increment bonds, we've issued them for the downtown and for North Gateway.
North Gateway, yeah, that's right.
So, so prior to
the
bond
agency
issuance, the
ordinance.
agency has to?
Yes, the
That's
agency
right.
would make
Right.
that decision.
Okay, I just want to make sure, because that sparked, your comments sparked that.
And just for clarification, there is no proposal to do any borrowing or bonds in McGilchrist.
That's right.
And I would just,
Just to be
ask,
clear.
at some point, if we ever talk about it again, which apparently we will at some time, we also look at South Waterfront for its future. Just given the same kind of dynamic at work.
Yeah.
It's uncomfortable what's
And
going on.
Member George has a question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, just a point of clarification, let's take the Salmon Run thing where Social Security apparently is going to move in there. If a developer develops a building and rents it to the Social Security Administration, is there not still tax increments from that, or do they have to actually own the building?
You know, under Oregon law, if an owner of property rents the property to a tax-exempt owner, they're able to take advantage of that tax exemption. And it's not simply government offices, it's also, it's a scientific, literary, illuminary, there are 4 categories.
Nonprofits?
Well, it's a nonprofit
Yeah,
world.
nonprofit.
It's a nonprofit world, but there are some limitations on it. So it's not just government, it can also be nonprofits.
I'd like just to clarify that, though. The state of Oregon is an exception to that. The state does not have to pay property taxes, but it chooses to. So in all state leases for office or for or industrial uses, they do pay the property tax in their leases.
And with a further clarification on that is that it's a state policy, that's not a statutory obligation.
That's correct. That's their decision. That's the state's decision.
And the state could change that policy anytime
That's
it
true.
wants.
There's your lesson for today.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Member Burke.
Getting off the state exemption issue with McGilchrist, understanding if we're building the improvements, I understand if someone wanted to build before, they'd basically pay us for their frontage and say, okay, you guys are going to do it here, I'll put money into your pot.
Could you get your mic
What if someone comes after the fact and builds, develops a property but a sidewalk and everything's already there? Are they now, do they have to reimburse the city for work the city did years ago?
No, we do not back charge for, we don't charge for latecomer fees for transportation.
Okay,
Which is
so-
which is what you're asking.
Yeah.
So we do for water and sewer, but not for transportation.
Thank you.
So.
Member Klein.
Page 49, in the new Ward 1, Councilor Bennett. Item number 3, I want to say thank you to Member Tesler for walking and biking, was it biking? Running across the bridge and attempting to get onto Edgewater from the Union Street Railroad Bridge. The West Salem Renewal Advisory Board will probably be looking at this dollar amount. So the question is, can these amounts change by redoing, balancing maybe another 5,000 between item 3 and number 10 on that page? There may be some additional signage needed for getting folks onto Edgewater, which is where we want them, where that path is. So we haven't quite made that connection yet, and I'm asking Urban Renewal Board in West Salem to take a look at it. So can they make slight adjustments between now and when we're done here?
They can. They have reviewed this.
Yes.
They have, okay.
This has come after the fact.
Oh, okay.
So they can make adjustments still, or do we have to do that here?
No, they can make recommendations.
Okay.
The agency board will ultimately approve whatever projects
Well, if there's no further questions on urban renewal, we will move on to, find my sheet here. Goal setting and policy discussion. By the way, I had no public signed up on the urban renewal. That's why we didn't have any public comment. This is an opportunity for Budget Committee members to discuss goals, concerns, and general policies. Who's got a goal? Clem?
I got a goal. Mr. Chair, I just want to clarify that, is this where we talk about wish list and
Yes.
policy option packages?
Yes.
You and I have had that discussion. I'd like to propose that we look at the ability to submit policy option packages for consideration, and in the spirit that City Manager Norris states, if you want to add something, you got to take it from some other place. So I'd like us to adopt at least the policy that during these deliberations we can consider. I don't like the word wish list. That sounds like Christmas, and there's nothing Christmassy about this budget. So I don't know if I'm making a motion here or if we're just, I would make the motion for policy option packages that are still within the dollar values that are presented in the city manager proposal.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Nikki seconds.
And what I was going to say is what I can do and had anticipated doing in regard to the general fund is if there are other choices that this group wants to make, and if something's 100,000 or 200,000 or 20,000, I can bring back a list of other options, talk about the policy choice recommendations staff made, and then bring back a list of other options. So you don't have to go through line items and try to gather that amount of money.
Sure. So if we wanted to increase funding for West Salem Library by $70,000, I could make that motion or just that recommendation? I'm asking.
I think what you would see under this kind of program would be a series of policy options that the manager would give us, and you'd have to pick which one you want to cut in order to fund the library.
Understand.
So you may have $70,000 worth of cuts in X that you would align with your $70,000 for the library, and then you'd ask the committee to make a choice. But that would occur, is that how you see
Yes.
it? Yeah.
When does that occur? When
the end.
When we hear the general fund, then I would make that.
Yeah, I think we would start adding to the wish list, anytime we want. That's how we've always done it. But in order to move the thing forward, if you can get it on the wish list, you've got it there. You made step one. Step two is find a policy option that has enough money to cover your wish list item. Step three would be then to get a majority of the budget committee to agree to use your policy option.
Sure.
Or there
Sure.
may be some substitute.
That makes perfect sense. What I'm not prepared to do tonight is discuss adjustments or policy option packages or wish lists with regard to the urban renewal and public works. So I'd like to be able to make that motion for the budget committee during any night, simply because it's just going to take some time to look at even what we have tonight. So is that the intent of how we want to do that?
Okay.
Yeah, I would move that we adopt the policy option package wish list that we've just described here.
Alternate expenditure
Yeah.
activities.
Okay.
Well, okay. Corrected to alternate expenditure activities, if that's what we need for the
Call it
record.
what you will.
But I think it's been seconded.
Yes, it has. Nikki seconded. Is there any discussion? Member Berger.
Yeah, do we really need this motion? I don't particularly, I understand what you guys are going for. I don't understand why we need a motion if it takes the majority of us to agree on a policy package. Why do we need a motion to agree later? We'll agree later. I don't understand
It's a
that.
very good question. I think what it does, as I understand it, is it allows the manager to give us policy option packages to give us essentially little or big financial packages that work within, as she sees, the best interests of the city and her budget and her management strategy. So we're not going into the budget saying, cut line B. We don't know what line B exactly does in the way she's figured this thing out. It recognizes a council manager, a budget committee manager relationship, and allows her to make the management decisions and us to take the hard votes. Now, if you want to sit around, I tell you the trick, just as someone who's done it before, it is very difficult to find where you're not pulling the string and the whole sweater's coming apart. And that allows the manager, most commonly the way this has been done in the past, is you'd make a motion, I would like to fund pools in West Salem, and the manager goes, and I instruct the manager to go find the money somewhere. And I think this gives us a pre-look at where the money's going to come from so we can align the decisions more accurately as we're making these decisions. It's kind of a little tougher program in terms of making changes.
But in the end, even with this motion, someone with the majority of this body, we could still say, fund the pools, you figure it out, I don't want to see your policy package, correct? I mean, with the majority, we can overrule ourselves.
No, if we agree to this, we would agree to working with her policy option packages as the available revenue sources for change. So we're not messing in the budget with just some line item you don't know anything about.
I don't see how a majority vote can then hamstring another majority vote from...
No, this is our agreement on how we will operate, is all it means. This is how we will operate. That's all it is. If you want to change how we operate at some future date, we can do that again. We can change how we operate every meeting. This is the idea, is to set up a kind of predictable system for us as we confront it. There's no question majorities rule, but once you start down this road, I think you'll see this is a fairly disciplined way to address changes in the budget.
So this isn't a change to our rules?
That's just how we're going to do it.
Okay.
It gives me some guidance when you make motions. I'll know what you're doing.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it's basically just clarifying the wish list that we will put items on. The manager will bring back items to choose from to defund, because we can't just say, we want this, figure it out, because this is a balanced budget. And to balance that, if we say we want you to spend this money, something else has to change in this, and for us to adopt it, we have to know what that change was. There has to be money taken out of someplace. If we're adding an expenditure, the revenue has to balance.
So I just want to be clear on the process. It's a three-step process. We make a motion, Budget Committee chooses to accept it or not. The manager will go choose some options of where the counterbalance would come from. The maker of the motion says, I like this one the best, and that's what goes to the wish list for final adoption? Is that how we're looking at it?
Yeah, you get it on the wish list. The manager either has a list she's given us, or she develops a list, on the fly, or however she wants to do it.
Yep.
And then you're going to have to link the two and get a majority vote on this
At the end.
linked.
And the maker of the
reduction
motion will make that link with the
on the
manager's
rebalance. Yeah.
options. And then at the end, last day of Budget Committee, prior to a final adoption, we go through that budget list, or the
Wish list.
alternate
It'll be the last meeting in
expenditures
April.
list.
Yes. Sorry, that's right.
Okay.
Yes, Mayor.
Well, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a minute, because it strikes me that if the majority of the council believes strongly that something needs to be funded, I find that it could be limiting if the city manager comes back to us with an either-or of some item that might also not be something that we would cut. I'm not saying that our city manager, Linda Norris, would play a game with us on that. I want to be clear. I don't think you would.
No.
But I'm concerned that if we feel strongly that something should be funded, then yes, we should find the money in the budget to fund it. But I'm not certain that I would feel comfortable only being told you're only going to have one or two choices of where that would come from. If it was something that the council, that the budget committee felt strongly we absolutely needed to do.
Right, and if I can respond to that, I would anticipate bringing back several options. These are things that would be, in this case, if it were 70,000, I think in your example, these are other choices that are equal to 70,000 that are, enough of a unit that it would make sense to cut those and wouldn't cause other consequences that would be unintended. And certainly I would bring back what I thought was reasonable and justifiable, and we could talk about the policy issues related to those.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I concur with the mayor. I think when we get down to that final vote, as Member Berger brings up, if I just don't agree with the policy option packages, I can try to get the necessary votes for the alternative reduction somewhere else. I'm not sure I believe that we should be spending all that money on consultants, for example. So I'm not going to be shy about at least suggesting where I think that 70,000 could come from. But again, at final night, if it doesn't stick with exactly with what Linda had, it makes sense that the majority could override, determine where that could
It always
happen.
can.
It always can. And so that's why Member Berger's comment's a good one. But I am concerned that I don't want to be canalized into just what Linda provides. I think the Budget Committee has got a responsibility for looking at the whole budget, so.
Claus.
I think along those lines, in my clarification, what I was understanding was if the Budget Committee agrees with the motion, the maker of the motion would then to some extent work with the city manager to come up with what they would like to see be that final budget mark. It's not going to be, it'll just come back mysteriously one day and here's your option. That's the way I'm understanding it, and since we're kind of setting up our rules here, I mean, if everybody's okay with that, that's how I'd like to see it. So it's a little bit of a dialogue between the maker of the motion and if they get the approval for that motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, and in that light, I mean, there may be a lot of things people would like to have, and here's the list of potential alternate cuts. Some of those may be palatable to people, some may not, but the first motion out of the bag is going to take the easier money, and so those decisions would get harder if it's done off a straight list. So hence, trying to find something that correlates with it with the city manager on the upfront may be easier than a really awful end to our last meeting, because that's where the really hard decisions will actually come from. The first ones in that meeting may be a little easier to swallow, and then no holds barred from there. I can't wait.
It's also easier if it's a small amount of money than if it's a large amount of money.
True.
Like 4 parks.
Very small amount of money, right?
Okay, is there any other discussion?
I have
I'm sorry,
not
Mayor.
on that rule. I
Okay.
have something else.
All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We have 2 nays that I see, Berger and Motley. Anybody else? Motion passes.
Good.
Okay.
Started. You're out of the game.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I would just like to make a couple of points of kind of custom and order. We start these meetings at 6 o'clock rather than at 6:30 when the council meeting starts. So please, everyone, it's helpful if we can all be here at 6 and ready to go. It'll shorten up our evening considerably. And the schedule is attached to the agenda. And I want to make a note that we've also we're saving May 2nd and May 9th as well in case we need that extra time. So I would ask everyone on the Budget Committee to also please reserve those dates as well.
A couple other things I'd like to mention, if you'll recall, I won't cite it chapter and verse because I don't have it in front of me, but my recollection is and I believe it's correct, that if you have requests of the staff for research, bring it to the committee. Nobody should be calling staff directly, or if they're going to call staff, that's what Linda's phone number is for, is to call her, I think, so that she can direct it. But what we don't want are requests for information without this committee's approval if the request involves more than an hour of staff time, which can happen pretty quickly. So if you need information, contact the city manager. Don't be that really is the appropriate way to do it. And she can determine then if this needs to come back to the committee. Most questions are pretty simple. Others can be more complicated. We're not here to redirect our staff off of the day-to-day business of running and serving the citizens of Salem in order to serve our curiosity. So, and the committee can vote then. If you want to have a real great research project by staff, we'll vote for it. But that requires that kind of discussion. And just another suggestion, I think ultimately a lot of our discussion, particularly as we go into the general fund, which is going to be a very difficult fund, I hope we look closely at programmatic and project-related discussion. Often now we're going to be stuck with this program or this program, and it's kind of like this is our first year to really get ready for the kind of cuts we're talking about, I think, over the next few years. We're talking about cutting whole programs now for the next few years. So for those of you who haven't still have a year or two left on your time on the Budget Committee. Thanks for your service. It'll be very exciting. We have one more public opportunity. Mr. Beasley, you want to take it.
Committee members, my name is Tom Beasley. I reside in Ward 3. For over, coming on now, a generation, the people who pay their water sewer bills have never been shown on those bills that part of that payment is going for taxes that go to another part of the government. Last year, this committee staunchly held that that should change. It has not. And there's no indication that it's going to change soon. And I think this committee needs to readdress that question and get it solved. A simple one-line sentence on the billing saying 5% of this bill is a franchise tax going to other parts of government service. That should be solved. Number two, it's time to stop the propaganda that private utilities pay franchise fees. They do not. The people who buy their services and commodities pay them. That has to stop in this whole budget discussion forever. It simply has to stop. And the last point I would make is that if you expect people outside of the city government to make thoughtful commentary on budgetary matters, they have to have access to the material more than 24 hours before it's discussed. So in setting your goals, you should have at least one full working week so that the public can review what's going to be talked about in budget committee hearings before they can show up and testify.
Great, thank you very much. Member Nate.
Thank you on that, Mr. Beasley. And yeah, I was going to make comment in regards to the difficulty in this evening's meeting for budget committee members as well, that we may want to just not connect the front-end budget message with two other large elements if those have not been available to the public at least a week in advance, and the members of the budget committee as well, for that matter.
This was a new process that, as we did the feedback last year after the Budget Committee, there was a request to try to get the meetings to 4 meetings. And to do that, we had to put more than just a budget message in the first meeting. Unfortunately, just because of the time it takes to verify all these numbers and put all this together, the documents weren't available online until yesterday late afternoon. They all are now online, or I'm not sure they're online, but you have the information here, so you will definitely have it a week before the next meeting.
If I follow, yeah, basically just be either
But we will rethink that.
set the deadline for this book,
Yeah.
and then have our meeting scheduled for the following week.
Yeah. That's how we had previously done it.
Yeah, I think we do need to recognize we go out of these meetings, we have meetings following it saying, how do we want them to do it better? Here's the consequence of one of our suggestions.
So I know several members of the public wanted access to this as soon as they could get it, so they could discuss it with their groups and what have you to give thoughtful input.
And we're
it's
not
hard to
done
do.
with Public Works and.
Oh, no, we'll be
You
definitely
can
coming back to this one.
testify on that anytime you want.
And if I may, a second item in regards to the message on the water sewer bill, I saw eyes moving as far as the answer to when that would be on, rather than have the Budget Committee make another motion or have discussion if we can get an answer to that.
Mr. Fernandez can respond.
Yes, very simply, we had promised council that we would take action on that. We did. The back of the pre-printed bill has information on the franchise fee. Those forms started being used in February of this year. We are actively working on the computing issues to get it on the front of the bill so that it is each individual customer can have it. There are computing and computational issues that we are working on. We expect to be ready to be able to show that beginning January 1st of 2013.
Great. Thank you. Madam Mayor.
Well, I just wondered, for the public who may want to actually look at the hard copy of the budget book, do we place books at the library and at the West Salem Library and maybe at Center 50 Plus, a place where people can actually see a hard copy?
Yes.
Yes, in fact, the library gets a reference copy. Both libraries do. Many of our lobby areas around City Hall and other of our satellite facilities have a reference book. And then if anyone from the public wants their own personal book to take home with them, we print many of them so that they can be available for personal use.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Member Berger.
Are we scheduled to have the noon meetings? We didn't have one this time.
No, that was part of the debrief, that
Okay.
instead of
Sorry,
having
I
the
missed
noon
that.
meetings, we had our meetings just to do a department overview about a month and a half ago.
Okay.
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 Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion items? All right, without a, oh, sorry.
Yeah, just to follow up, is the budget online, or when will it be available online?
Ms. Stemple.
Yes, Councilor Dickey, the books 2 and 3 are out online, and they were yesterday afternoon. We just got book 1 from the printers this morning, and it takes a while to scan it and get it online. Hopefully tomorrow. We did say in our legal ad that they would be available Friday, but we're struggling to get them out as soon as possible.
And hard copies?
Hard copies are available now.
Where?
You can come to the Finance Department. Thank you.
Room?
Room 230.
Okay, excellent. If there are no objections, then the Budget Committee is adjourned.